Okay, thanks everybody. Thank you very much for attending and welcome to this meeting of the Strategy and Resources Policy Committee. The meeting today is open to the public. There is one report in the agenda which we'll come to later that isn't available to the public and press because it contains exempt information. We'll deal with that in a moment. The meeting is being webcast. And the recording will be available to watch later on through the council website. We'll begin the meeting with public questions, and we've received 8 questions from 4 members of the public who are here today. Could I ask that mobiles are switched off or put on silent, and there's no fire test planned. If there is an emergency evacuation, then staff will guide us out, and the assembly point is in Tudor Square. Right. Item 1 is just apologies for absence. Craig?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we've received apologies from Councillor Fran Melvin.
Thank you very much. Right, can I then ask members of the committee to introduce themselves, and then the officers who are here introduce themselves after that. My name is Tom Hunt. I'm the leader of the council and chair of this committee. We'll go this way. Angela.
Councillor Angela Ardensio, Chair of the Health and Social Care Policy Committee and member for Broomhill and Cherrywell.
Thanks. Douglas Johnson, Chair of Housing.
Councillor Zahira Naz, Chair of Finance Committee, also a member of the Darnell Ward.
Councillor Dondale, Chair of Education, Children and Families Committee and member for Shire Green and Brightside Ward.
Councillor Minesh Parekh, Councillor for Crooks Crosspool Ward, Deputy Chair of the Economic Development and Skills Committee and substitute member for Fran Belbin, who's off today.
Councillor Ben Miskell, Chair of Transport, Regeneration and Climate.
Councillor Jordan, Chair of Waste and Street Scene.
Councillor Penny Baker, Vice Chair of Housing and Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Sheffield Mohammed, Ecclesall Ward.
Martin Smith, I'm the Chair of the Economic Development and Skills Committee.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Richard Williams. I'm a member for Stellington Ward and I chair the Community Sports and Leisure Policy Committee.
And my name is Dan Hurst. I'm an elected member for Richmond Ward.
Thank you very much, everybody. If I can ask the officers to introduce themselves, starting with David on my left.
David Hollis, General Counsel.
Kate Josephs, Chief Executive.
James Henderson, Director of Policy and Democratic Engagement.
Greg Fell, Director of Public Health.
Philip Gregory, Director of Finance and Commercial Services.
Thank you very much, everybody. So, as I mentioned in the introduction, there's confidential information in the appendix at item 13. If members wish to discuss that, then we will just need to ask the members of the public and the press who are here to kindly leave for that part of the meeting, and we'll pause the webcast if that's the case. Right, declarations of interest. Are there any members who wish to declare an interest in any of the items of business on the agenda today? Nope. Okay, thank you. Right. Item 4 is the minutes of the previous meeting. We last met on the 20th of November. The minutes have been shared. Can I ask members to approve as a correct record the minutes of that meeting? Everyone content with those minutes? Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Right, public questions and petitions. We have no petitions today, but we do have public questions, and public questions have been received from 4 members of the public, and I'll invite each person to come up and turn to the front seat to ask those questions. And the first person to ask questions today is Mr. Russell Johnson.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to be here, and season's greetings to members and officers. I'm, as you know, Tom, as well as asking my own questions, I'm going to ask on behalf of another concerned citizen. Would you like that in any order?
If you ask your questions first, and then if you can ask questions on behalf of Mr. Buxton. Sure.
Okay, that's fine. And in terms of my questions, would you like them asked separately, and then you give your answer or altogether?
Why don't you ask them separately, because each contains a number of different points.
Okay. First question is about the plaque. At May Full Council and June Strategy and Resources, as part of the Locock response, SCC agreed to the installation of a plaque in the town hall entrance, which would be, in the words of the officer who authored that report, quote, in recognition of those who fought for our environmental heritage and were vindicated, and to serve as a reminder to all elected members that this failure of leadership will never happen again. This, the committee report stated, is expected in March of next year. Questions. A. Please would Councillor Hunt provide today a progress report around the procurement, costings, consultations on wording and expected installation dates for the promised plaque, and accounts for any anticipated delays. B. Please would the leader share with interested members of the public any plans or preparations for the unveiling ceremony of the said plaque, including consulting citizens and elected members on this matter.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We're on schedule to unveil the plaque by the 6th of March. The details of the unveiling ceremony will be confirmed in due course and will make members of the public and members aware. We've got design that's been completed by our capital delivery service, which we've shared for informal feedback with key stakeholders, including the Sheffield Street Tree Partnership, Sheffield Tree Action Groups, and members of the Waste and Street Scene Policy Committee, which has responsibility for street trees. Further work is now underway with Sheffield Tree Action Groups to develop the detailed plaque design, which will then be taken through a public consultation process prior to it being signed off, ready for manufacture and installation by the 6th of March 2024. We're aiming for completion of the design in early January to then start public consultation, ready to go to manufacture in February. Until the designs have been agreed, we are unable to provide the actual cost. However, we will be in the original budget agreed by this committee. Other than officer time spent on this, no costs have been incurred so far.
Thank you, Tom. By the way, do you mind me calling you Tom, or would you prefer the more formal Councillor Hunt?
You can call me Tom or Councillor Hunt. I'll leave it up to you.
Thank you. Okay, that's an encouraging answer and more progress than I had expected, to be honest. So, thank you. Question 2 is about Locock actions. At the S&R Policy Committee on the 19th of June, the Council agreed this. The committee should agree a budget of £50,000 to support the work set out above. And the work set out above was what was called this suite of actions, which I won't go into here. I think all members are aware of that. Please would the leader, without of course revealing any names, and in the interest of transparency for accounting for public monies, put on record today the breakdown of expenditures from that allocation to date. Does the leader anticipate requesting authority for an additional amount, as was previously suggested?
Thank you. The report considered by this committee in June of this year made provision for a sum of up to £50,000 to be used specifically to support actions arising from that apology process and for the costs of the installation of that town hall plaque that I just referred to. That report noted that the costs associated with the reimbursement of those who had paid financial court orders was accounted for within costs that had previously been set aside for the running of the inquiry, and therefore did not need to be found from the £50,000 allocated by the committee in June. To date, the apology process, which I and others have been involved in, has incurred no costs other than officer time, and the work on the plaque has not yet reached a point where costs are due. As I've already mentioned, the plaque is due to be manufactured and installed early in 2024 following consultation, and costs will fall due at that point. We'll make public a summary of those costs once they're known. There will be some external spend on using independent investigators resulting from complaints made arising from issues raised in the inquiry report, and when finalised, those costs will also be made public.
Thank you, Tom. So it appears there will be some monies left for making the appropriate reparations to people which are outstanding, about which I think more later. Thank you. Third topic is those apologies, which you referred to in your previous answer, Tom. There is a number of people who have not yet received the promised apologies as a result of the wrongful actions of members and officers during the scandalous destruction of 5,000 street trees, as described by Sir Mark. A, is this because, i.e. the lack of the incompleteness of the apologies, is this because of the reluctance to use contact emails because of fear of a GDPR breach already held for the likely recipients? If so, has SCC asked their chosen representative organisation, the one mentioned actually in your previous answer, STAG, which, by the way, has a claim to represent us, but many are sceptical about that. Has SCC asked STAG to contact their members and supporters seeking requests for apologies and permission to use email addresses? This is in the context of the very incomplete nature of the apologies, which I think the council seems to think is on the verge of being closed down. C, is Councillor Hunt and the senior officer cadre aware that many people in the city are understandably sceptical of the council's new, in inverted commas, core value, openness and honesty, are important to us, suspecting that this, and perhaps the two other values as well, are little more than window dressing? Do they, Councillor Hunt and senior officers, recognise that such views are amplified by, for example, the apparent absence of accountability associated with the recent Containergate debacle and the inexplicable Rose Garden Cafe saga and continuing extraordinary delays in FOIR and complaints handling? I can just add to this, if I may briefly, Tom, that a formal complaint of mine from the 12th of April has still not been resolved. I don't expect you to respond directly on that, because clearly it wouldn't be appropriate, but just by way of information. One complaint I know of is over 2 years old, continued long grassing by this council, which is a well-established technique. An FOR of mine, which was quite simple, is at least 2 months overdue, with no apparent reason. COVID no longer. You're trying to close me down, Tom.
No, I'm just saying, you've asked your questions. These are additional points you're making.
I have. I'm trying to communicate more effectively with you. And, you know, closing people down is probably not a great idea in terms of accountability. Yeah. So I'll conclude on that. An FOI of mine is very much overdue. An even simpler FOI is even more overdue. But I won't refer to that specifically.
Thanks, Mr. Johnson. So let me take your first two questions together. Strategy and Resources Committee, this committee agreed at our meeting in June that as part of the consideration of the Locott report and how we would meet all the recommendations from it, that the apology process would work on the basis of self-identification. That means, put simply, that anyone who wished to receive an apology who wasn't included in one of the categories specified in the report would be asked to come forward to request an apology, rather than the council coming to its own judgment about whether an apology would be welcomed. This was done both for the practical reason that the council does not hold contact details for everyone who may wish to have received an apology, and because self-identification also mitigates the risk of contacting people who do not wish to hear from the council and would find that contact upsetting or inappropriate. The process followed was set out in detail at Appendix C of the paper that you've no doubt read that was before this committee in June, and from my experience that process has been working well and has led to apologies being given and received over the last few months. Your question about the council's values, these were developed neither by elected members, such as myself, nor by senior officers. They were developed by staff from right across the council, and they reflect the behaviours and ways of working that we would expect from everybody in this organisation. Our values are fundamental to the sort of organisation that we want to be now and for the future. We're proud of them, have taken steps to embed them with staff right across the council, and we're already beginning to see changes in the way in which we work. For example, our work in developing the city goals has been done in partnership with local people and communities, which is fundamentally different to how we might have conducted such a piece of work in the past. And in fact, we're soon in this meeting to consider the draft council plan. That is called Together We Get Things Done, one of the council's values, and we're making quite a clear statement about the strength of support that we give to that value by calling our plan for the next 4 years, Together We Get Things Done. As we acknowledge in today's report, culture change, of which values are one part, will take time to embed, but it's a process that we've started and are entirely committed to. The alternative to having a value explicitly focused around openness and honesty would be to not have one, and that, in our view, would send entirely the wrong message, the wrong signal about the sort of organisation that we wish to be and that the people of Sheffield expect us to be. And on your final question, the question, let me just, around Container Gate, as you referred to it, and Rose Garden Cafe and FORs, the answer is that for each of those issues named in the question, we've sought to ensure that as much information as possible is made available publicly. We're doing our business out in public, and that stakeholders and the general public are aware of the process and progress that's being made in line with those values. Where things haven't gone as anticipated, we have replanned, taken action to mitigate issues, and have been open and honest about challenges that we face. It's important that as stewards of public money, we're accountable when mistakes are made. The recent audit and standards report on the containers issue demonstrates that. We're not afraid to open ourselves up to external scrutiny. Over the summer, in line with the recommendations from Sir Mark's report, we asked the Information Commissioner's Office to provide a consensual audit of our FOI processes and approach. That audit gave reasonable assurances about those processes. It made some recommendations, 2 of which were urgent, and we're making sure that they're actioned. We know that timescales for responding to FOI requests are too long. That was confirmed by the Information Commissioner's Officer. The reasons for that are complex, but we're working to improve our approach. Thank you very much. Your next question.
One more, I think.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay. Question 4, final one and short. At the extraordinary council meeting on the 10th of May of this year, a motion was passed that included these words. This council believes that for individuals who were council cabinet members in the civic years 15-16 and 17-18, resignation from public office would be an appropriate indication of acceptance of responsibility for the harms caused. The harms, of course, for those who maybe are not familiar with this, the harms caused by Sheffield City Council's egregious actions during those years, damaging both people and the environment. So that was the motion on the 10th of May of this year. Questions surrounding that. A, is the council satisfied that everything possible has been done to comply with that resolution? And B, are there any further attempts being planned or considered to give that resolution and the leader's party apparatus some reality and credibility? And I do understand, I'll just add briefly if I may, Tom, I do understand the issues that you may face in terms of the wreckage of the Labour Party and making things difficult regarding those people. However, I do expect efforts to be made.
Thanks, Mr. Johnson. As we've discussed before, there is nothing that the council can do to compel members to resign. Elected members can be disqualified from being a councillor, but that's for a very defined set of criteria set out in law. The monitoring officer, neither the monitoring officer, I should say, nor the council as a body has the power to compel an elected member to resign their seat. It is also not a binding decision the council can make, and these are not matters that it could lawfully decide as enforceable. The motion that was passed is an expression of opinion. That's why the wording states that this council believes. Thank you very much. So
I do understand that you can't compel, but I would expect some sort of expression of pressure, of persuasion in that respect.
Thanks, Mr. Johnson. So Mr. Justin Buxton has sent in some questions. He's not able to attend today, and I understand that you're going to be asking questions on his behalf.
Yes, thank you. So these are questions, just one question actually, from Mr. Justin Buxton, who can't be here today. I am, just as a preface, I am hoping for an honest answer today, although I do understand that SCC's addiction to opacity is a hard one to cast off. So, Justin says this: at the Strategy and Resources Committee, 19th of June of this year, the Council accepted in full the recommendations of a report by the Chief Executive that included, at paragraph 18, a statement that the Council would apologise to the courts. And this is a very, very serious matter. Again, for those who are not familiar with the situation, SCC misled the High Court. This is acknowledged, this is a matter of fact, acknowledged by Sir Mark. Whether it constituted perjury is another matter. It may well have done. So, the Council agreed to apologise to the courts. On the 27th of September, Paul Brooke, who was a prominent campaigner at the time, submitted a Freedom of Information request asking the Council to confirm whether an apology to the court had been made. Simple, you might think, yes or no. On 30th of October, the statutory period roughly for responding to FOIs, the Council apologised. They're very good at that. I've had loads and loads of those from the Council. That they had missed the deadline for providing this information. Paul Brooke then chased this up on the 13th of November. On the 1st, no response was received. On the 1st of December, Paul again chased this now very overdue FOIR. This time, the Council deigned to respond, stating, quote, "Thank you for your email of 1st of December 23, giving us a deadline of 6th of December. Please grant us another 24 hours. SCC did not respond in those 24 hours. Yet again, this is, I'm afraid, a story that we've seen so many times. Question: have the Council apologised to the court yet? And will the apology to the court, if there has one, be made public without redaction? If not, why not?
Thank you, Mr. Johnson, and thank you, Mr. Buxton. I hope we'll be able to watch the webcast later. The apology to the court has not yet been sent. We need to make sure that the apology properly reflects the findings in the report of Sir Mark Lowcock. The inquiry was independent and it received its own legal advice on the matters that it said the Council should apologise for. The Council was not a party to that advice, so it had to consider the legal points that were raised. The Council wanted to be sure itself, through examining the cases, that it concurs with the inquiry finding that the misleading impression the court had from a document did not make a difference to the outcomes in the hearings. This has taken longer to determine than we had hoped. I have been assured that the apology will be sent to the court before the end of this month. This will be made public, and I have asked officers to notify Mr. Buxton when this takes place.
Just briefly, I know I'm not allowed a conversation. Lowcock published in March, and you're still considering it, and you have an experienced legal team. This doesn't really hold water, Tom.
This committee, in June, took time to, having had the report in March, took time to consider how we were going to implement all of the findings from Sir Mark's report. This committee, as you know, set out in June how we would do that. Next week, we have an extraordinary meeting of the Strategy and Resources Committee, and that will set out our progress towards meeting Sir Mark's recommendations, and we're being completely open and transparent about our progress towards meeting those recommendations. These matters are of significant legal complexity, and it does take time to consider them, but as I've said, this has taken longer to determine. The apology is, I've been assured that it will be sent to the court before the end of the month. Thanks, as always.
I do hope the Council isn't frightened.
Okay, the next question has been submitted from Ruth Hubbard. Ruth isn't here today, but the question is around the cost of living strategy paper that we have later on our agenda. Ruth's question was, for clarity and information, please could you talk through each of the items listed in Table A, paragraph 1.14, as to what they are and how they arise in these kinds of amounts. Just for everyone's benefit in the room, what that's referring to is a table in the report that sets out, that we'll look at later, which sets out the currently unallocated funding from the Household Support Fund in the report. There's quite a lot of complex information about exactly how the figures there have been calculated and what they refer to. I think rather than read out all this today, I will make sure that it's circulated to members of this committee and sent to Ruth Hubbard so that she's got that detailed information. And then the next question today is from Mr. Campaign. I think he's here. Yes, hello.
There we go, that's working fine. Thank you, Councillor, everybody here. My first question refers to a written response by Councillor Hunt to Councillor Johnson last week. I'd like to clarify the content of your response to Councillor Johnson's written question. The reply references complaints, possibly in regard to the undertaker's long-running complaint, and the subsequent delay that this complaint is causing to some apologies. Can you please clear up which apologies might be delayed by these complaints and why?
Thanks very much, Mr. Payne. The apologies which have been delayed are the apologies to those who provided undertakings. The apologies are delayed for all of this group, whether individuals within the group have made a complaint or not. This is because the subject matter of the complaint is common across these individuals, and the outcome of the complaint may determine the final content of the apology beyond matters that are explicitly dealt with in the inquiry report. You will appreciate that I cannot go into specific details of that complaint here today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. On June the 19th, 2023, at Strategy and Resources, a meeting already referenced a couple of times, a paper that's by the leader and the chief executive made a number of pledges in a report to this committee. And in specific relation to those subject to committal proceedings during the time spelt out in the Lowcock report, yourself and the chief executive said, and I quote, that they will do everything possible to mitigate any ongoing impact to those sentenced. And this could include, for example, providing letters of explanation should they need to explain the reasons for their sentences when job seeking, for example. None of the proposed actions relate directly to me have been carried out over this last 6 months, and there are real-life ongoing consequences as a result. That paper in June refers to those real-life ongoing consequences, and in that 6 months, some of those consequences happen. At the very least, it's been quite difficult or embarrassing for me on a couple of occasions, and possibly has had the direct result of costing me financially and directly. There is a legal maxim that justice delayed is justice denied. And this is one of the definitions of this, is that if a remedy is available and not forthcoming in good time, it is the same as if no remedy has been made at all. And I think that's something, the principle of which applies to our situation. It should have been a matter of urgency for this council to put in motion the promised actions and mitigations. However, we have merely had delay after delay after delay without explanation or update. This has done further damage to people who you damaged at the time. We have had an apology early this year for the damage done to people's lives at the time. There is more damage being done by this needless delay over apologies and mitigation. Will the leader of the council acknowledge this, but will you further apologise for the failure so far to carry out the mitigation process that you promised to me and others 6 months ago?
Thank you, Mr. Payne. We, as you rightly highlighted, we did apologise for the hurt and the harms that were caused to individuals and to the whole of the people of Sheffield in that open and full public apology that we issued back in June. On the specifics of your case, Mr. Payne, officers have informed me that so far you're the only person who's requested that specific assistance. I know that in discussions, officers have said that they can provide that general letter, but have also said that if any specific occasion arises, they would be happy to provide a specific letter setting out the context of the hearings. They've also said that they will be happy to speak to a prospective employer or contractor should this be requested. While I am informed that you have not received that general letter yet, I'm reassured that you have, if you had any specific need of assistance to date, that this would have been provided. I have been assured that you will receive that general letter very soon, before the end of January at the very latest. We have not assumed that everyone who is subject to court action wants such assistance. If anyone else does, then they should get in touch with us. Thank you. Thank you very much. So that concludes public questions today. We have a couple of agenda items which are sort of more the retirement of staff and also the work programme. Because we have a number of guests here today who are here for item 9 around protected characteristics for care experienced young people, with the committee's permission, I'm going to suggest we move that up the agenda. So we take that now because I know that people have given up time to come here today and have other appointments later. And then we go back to the agenda shortly. So, item 9, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand straight over to Councillor Dale to introduce this agenda item and then introduce our guests.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to say much because this is more about our guests and their experience in this area. But I'm really pleased to bring this paper to the committee today. But I'd like to thank all members of the Council for their cross-party support of the Labour motion from October at full Council. Today is an important day for people with care experience as we recognise that as a protected characteristics, and we will embed this into our Council decision making through equality impact assessments. Until such time that a new government bring into legislation the recommendations from the independent review of children's social care by Josh McAllister. But we can't wait for a new government, so we're doing that here today in Sheffield. Once again, in the face of government inaction, it has fallen to local authorities to take the lead, inspired by the voices of those in care and national campaigners such as Terry Galloway, who is here today, and the Showers You Care Too campaign. We have passed the motion to treat care experience as a protected characteristic, something which I'm really, really proud of in Sheffield. And I'd now like to hand over to our team, who, if you would like to come forward and speak to us about your experiences in this matter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all very much for joining us. I know that you've prepared some words to share with the committee today, so very much going to hand over the floor to yourselves. I don't know if there's a particular order you're going in, but hand over to yourselves.
Hello, everyone. For people who don't know us, we're the Voice and Influence team. We're 5 care experience adults in paid positions in commissioned roles, and we've been in post for over a year now, and our job is basically gathering the voices of young people, especially care experienced young people, and making sure they're listened to and heard through the service, and that is done usually through collaborative work commissioned by the service and other organisations, and we are here to make impact and change in effective ways and creative ways. I'm going to get each of us to introduce ourselves. So my name is Belinda Moradin, I'm Voice and Influence Worker.
My name is Ray Sloan. I'm also part of the Voice and Influence team.
Hi, I'm Wilson Mafoti and I'm part of the Voice and Influence team.
My name's Jake Owen Shuett. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm also a part of the Voice and Influence team.
And here with me is a Voice and Influence team lead, the manager of our team. And there's 4 of us today to talk about specific topics that we wanted to address to you guys based on what young people have said and spoken to us through our roles. And the one I'm going to be discussing today is about housing in local authorities. I feel passionate about housing because for care leavers, finding a home with the local authority is very difficult and a lot of pressure for a care leaver. For a care leaver, it is a huge step into independency by being put under the local authority housing department. For many care leavers, it is a time where we step away from the children and family service and transition into needing local authority housing, on having access to a housing, on how they're being treated by the housing service and how they're unfairly judged, all because of being a care leaver is a common experience that lots of care leavers have. This then makes care leavers feel like they have been overlooked by the service and how the home that they want and what is offered can be different. This shows how housing sometimes can be less inclined to give care leavers the home that they want, and how being a care leaver is a huge decision factor for even being allowed to be staying with friends. And from what we know from Bright Spots, only 2 out of 10 care leavers have a friend. This leads to them being on their own and being placed in a house that they don't feel safe and happy in, and sometimes causes a lack of trust and safety in the service. And that is why today I am advocating on behalf of all care leavers to have their identity as a care leaver to be a protected characteristic, because of the positive impact it can have for a care leaver, being able to have more opportunities and more options, and also about how they might be treated in the service might be differently and more positive. But most of all, it's about them finding a home that they feel happy and safe in. Thank you.
So my speech today is about loneliness of care leavers and further education and jobs. We know that there is care leavers that feel lonely more than those that are not care experienced people. We know that not many care leavers have a job or are in further education. We know this from Bright Spots, which is a survey that care leavers fill in so that we know what they need help with and what are the biggest issues. There are over 600 care leavers and only 5% are in a job or in further education within Sheffield. From my experience of loneliness for a good few months, I struggled. I felt trapped. I felt that I could not get help. From my experience of being a voice and influence worker, I think we need more care leaver specific jobs where being a care leaver is the qualification for the role. Giving care leavers support and the time to develop and improve their skills is how we will improve the lives of all care leavers.
Today, I stand before you to address a critical issue that has been overlooked: the treatment of individuals in care within the criminal justice system. For far too long, those in care have faced stigma, discrimination, unequal treatment compared to their peers. When a person in the care encounters criminal justice system, they often face biases, misconceptions, resulting in unfair treatment. Their missing reports might not be received as the same urgency or attention, leading to delayed responses and increased vulnerability. The emotional toll of feeling neglected, marginalized, and misunderstood is immeasurable. But today I implore us to envision a different future where we must recognise care as a protected characteristic within the justice system. By doing so, we pave the way for a more inclusive and just society. Creating safeguards within the system to protect those in care means understanding their unique circumstances and providing tailored support. It means training law enforcement to recognise the complexities and these individuals face and to respond with empathy and understanding. We need proactive measures to ensure that missing reports of individuals in care are treated with urgency they deserve, knowing that every moment is crucial in ensuring their safety. Moreover, implementing support networks and specialised services within the justice system can mitigate the trauma and stress experienced by those in care. In this envisioned future, the police and justice system will stand as protectors for all, irrespective of their background or circumstances. They will serve not just as enforcers of the law, but guardians of compassion and equality. It's time to rewrite the narrative. Let us build a future where the criminal justice system serves as a beacon of fairness, whereas rights and well-beings of individuals within the care are not just respected, but championed. Together we can create a society where every person, regardless of their background, receives the same dignity, respect and fair treatment under the law. And that's it.
I want to talk to you today about employment and what that looks like as a care leaver. The current job market is already incredibly competitive, but there's an added difficulty in securing work when you are a care leaver. We know that currently only around 5% of care leavers are in further education or stable employment, and I want to shed a little bit of light on that reasoning. There's a lot of stigma around the care system and the type of people who have moved through it. Many companies, because of the stigma and the negative stereotypes, are hesitant to hire those who are care leavers. I want to share my own experience of this. A few years ago, in an interview for a job, I was outright told that the company would not hire me because I was a care leaver and they didn't want to be stolen from, and that they were sure that I would understand that. It took everything in me not to leave that interview in tears. And this is not an isolated incident. I know so many others that have faced the same situation within Sheffield. I now work as a voice and influence worker within Sheffield City Council, and having this job has improved my life, my confidence, my work skills. Many of us are able and willing to work, but are being shut down before we even begin. Like, as our corporate parents, I ask you, would you be okay with this for your own kids? I'm more comfortable telling a prospective employer about my sexuality and my religion than the fact that I was in care. And that shouldn't be the case, because being in care is not something that you should have to feel ashamed of. It's not something you should have to lie about to get a job. Making care leave as a protective characteristic would help so many young people gain confidence and employment. So we're asking you to please help us make this right. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming and sharing that powerful testimony with us. I think we all had a sense that this was an important step that the council needed to take. I think what you've just said to us has underscored the complete importance, the imperative of us taking this step. What we're being asked to consider today is that we confirm that we will regard care experience as a protected characteristic, and just be really clear, that means that in every decision that we take, in every decision that comes to a committee, this committee or other committees, we will be considering care experience as a protected characteristic to make sure that what you've said about whether it's in the realm of housing, criminal justice, employment, care experience is a factor that we will have to take into account rightly in our decision making. And so thank you for making the case today for why that is so important, and the difference that I hope that we can begin to make by taking this step. We're going to have an opportunity for comments, I think, from members of the committee, and then we'll offer the Voice and Influence team a chance to share any further reflections, if that's okay with all of you. Councillor Dale.
Thank you. I'd just like to thank you all again for coming. I don't know why you always make me cry, but you really do. I'm just really proud that you were able to come and share your lived experience in a room full of strangers, and I think it's really commendable that you've been able to do that, and I really do thank you for that. I think what I would like to do is, I don't want to put any of the chairs of committees on the spot, but with the stories that you've told us today, we've got the chair for the Communities Committee, which looks at youth justice, so I think I'd like to link you in to Councillor Williams. I think Councillor Smith does further education and employment, and Councillor Johnson for housing. And I think it's really important, and I know that you scrutinise us, and I know that you're actively involved anyway, but I think it's really important that you're able to have an inroad directly to the chairs of those committees. So if you wouldn't mind, if we can, I don't want to put you on the spot, I'm sure you would have offered anyway, but yeah, if that's all right, we can link you in so that you can follow up and make sure that we're all doing, you've always got my ear, but that we're all doing exactly what it is we're supposed to be doing from this point onwards. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Dan. I'm sure that members of the committee will no doubt be taking that up very, very seriously. And I think the important thing to say is that this will affect all of us, whether we're committee chairs or not. All 84 councillors are involved in the decision-making of this council. And so this decision that we're taking, yes, the committee chairs have a direct responsibility, but we all do as well. So that's why it's such an important decision that we're taking today. I've seen Councillor Mohammed and then Councillor Smith in that order, and then I'll come back over this side.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Thank you very much for coming before us, for actually coming and sharing experiences as your corporate parents for care leavers. I'm a parent of 3 young children, youngish now, similar age to you guys, I suspect, and it would be absolutely outrageous if my daughter went to a job interview and somebody decided to discriminate against them on the basis, and you're very brave to come here and share that, and actually, Chair, it outrages me as well, that our young people who need the best start in life, we've got employers out there that think they can discriminate, because that's what it is. If somebody else has said, I'm not employing you because of your religion or your ethnicity or something else, then we rightly would be wanting to take action against them. I'm sorry that the government at the moment's not including this. I really hope and pray that the next government, whoever that may be, may take this more seriously, and I will fully back you guys in your campaign for this, because it's just not a Sheffield thing, Dawn, is it? It's for everywhere, and I'm sure we've got the LGA peer review coming tomorrow, Chair. So people from outside of Sheffield are coming to review the council, and I suspect, between us, myself and Councillor Hunt, we will raise this with them, that they've come to inspect what we do, and we're going to say, this is one of the things we have done, and we want you now to go away at the LGA and see how we can make sure that the experiences that you guys have talked about, that there's many other young people that have suffered that discrimination and that lack of opportunity. I'm a youth worker away from here, so a lot of the stuff that you guys are talking about resonates for me. When I hear that our young people still are being discriminated against, and like I say, it's a call for action, Chair, and thank you for the motion, Councillor Dale, and thank you everyone who supported it, because it was, all the council, all 84 of us are, as corporate parents here, want to support you. And I'm sure colleagues, particularly from them 3 committees, will want to say something. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. Councillor Smith, and then I've got Councillor Agenzio, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Williams, and Councillor Hurst. So there's quite a few people who want to speak, so perhaps if we could just all keep our comments relatively brief.
Thanks, Tom. I'll be brief. Thanks for coming, guys. Some years ago, I was a volunteer with the Prince's Trust, and one of the groups we were specifically assisting were care leavers. They were one of our priorities. And so I have personal experience of trying to help people with some of the issues that particularly Ray and Wilster raised. So I've seen for myself some of those problems. I've seen how hard it can be to overcome some of those problems. So, in short, this has got my full support.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. Councillor Agenzio.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming to talk to us. And just as a side comment, it's so much better when we have lived experience coming into a room, and it makes it all more kind of poignant for us to see what we do here having an impact on real people. And I think maybe we should do that more often, Chair. The other thing that I think is important is just to always remember that people don't have just one protected characteristic. Often people have more than one, and they will suffer a lot more because of that. So being a woman, you can be discriminated, but if you're a woman and a care leaver, that is, you know, it compounds the kind of discrimination. So always remember that people are not made of one tick box, but we are very complex, all of us. And I'm assuming that this will mean that our EIA will change to include that. And can we do that swiftly so that from next week, when we have our next meeting, we can already see what impact whatever we're presenting in every meeting has on care leavers. So let's do it as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Agency. I think papers for next week's meeting are published today, so that might be a little too soon, but we can make sure that this is taken into account as quickly as possible. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks then. So as Chair of Housing, I was really glad that you led off with housing issues because it's critically important, isn't it? So thanks, Belinda, for doing that. Well, so what I was thinking was that now you're actually in the Voice and Influence team, it would be really useful if you could gather some, pick up on any of the specifics of what happens when you experience, any of you experience going through the housing system. Because the difficulty we always have is that we can have general criticisms of, say, our Housing Solutions Service, which, frankly, is a service that's massively under pressure because there's a massive shortage of housing in the city, certainly housing that we can afford, and there are a lot of people, all with massively competing different needs, all trying to get into that. And it's all really, but it's I won't say the service is at a crisis point, but it is really, really under pressure. And that does sometimes lead to bad decision making. What would be really useful is if you can put your finger on exactly what it was at any particular instance where you've been effectively singled out because of your care experience. And possibly if it's not because of your care experience, but it's maybe some other factor, then it's still useful to know what that is. Because it's only when we get those really specific complaints that we can really work out what's going wrong in this service. And then we can say what we can do about it. I mean, some of it might be staff training, some of it might be more structural. But as elected members, we're not involved in the operations and we don't get to hear about that. So it would be really useful to get your team coming forward with some specific reports on really whatever area you think is important. But for me, I'm interested in housing. So, Belinda, job for you. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Williams, Councillor Hurst, and I think Chief Executive would like to say a word, and then I'll give the floor back to you, and if there's any further remarks you want to make, that'd be great. Councillor Williams.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I've learned an awful lot in the last half an hour. Not all nice, but thank you very much for coming in, and thank you to Councillor Dale for setting this up. What I've learned is that there's this umbrella term, care experience, but within, just under that, are individuals with their own individual issues and concerns. I was particularly moved by Jake with his talk about loneliness. It's a hidden issue in our society, and as part of the community's portfolio, I know it exists. What I'd like to do is invite you all to come back in and see me and have a more detailed chat about your concerns. And just again, thank you very much for coming in today.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Hurst.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming in to talk to us today. And I do sincerely hope that just regarding care experience as a protected characteristic will actually have an impact on the lives of young people leaving care and the quality of that. But what I would very much, it follows on from what Councillor Johnson said, what I would very much like to do, if within your remit, within the Voice and Influence project, is to ask this committee to invite you back as you go through identifying the challenges and some of the successes in implementing that decision and putting those enacting those principles. There's going to be obstacles, there's going to be barriers, but equally, I think you're pushing at an open door today. So if we could, as a committee, invite the Voice and Influence team back and listen to that experience at a future point and learn from that and see what else we can put in place to help this, the motion become embedded and the direction of travel succeed.
Thanks, Councillor Hurst. So I think just to pick up Councillor Hurst's comments there, what we'd really like, hopefully you're hearing loud and clear from everyone, is to continue to have a dialogue with you, continue to work with you to make sure that the decision we're taking leads to actions at this committee, across the whole council, across each of the committees. And perhaps after this meeting, we meet with Councillor Dale and others to just work out a bit of a process around that, rather than sort of having you meet lots of different people and get pulled in different directions. We'll coordinate that to make sure that it's as smooth a process as possible. Are there any other points you wanted to raise today? But I have forgotten that Kate wanted to come in. So, Chief Executive.
Through the chair, thank you. I don't often say things in these items, but I do just want to say on behalf of the officer core of the council how proud we are to have you as our colleagues. It's fantastic to see the growth and the value that you've already delivered just as a small team. So I've learned a huge amount from you all, and I'm really proud to call you my colleagues, so thank you. One of the things I was reflecting on as you spoke was our city goals that are currently in draft, but also the fact that we work in a complex system across the city, and so thinking about things like the points Wilster's made around the criminal justice system, or the points Ray and Jake made around employment and businesses, the points Belinda made around housing, recognising that actually we have lots of partners in the city who I think need to know that the council is taking this leadership role in making care experience and protected characteristics, and who we can legitimately ask, whether that's the Chambers of Commerce, whether that's South Yorkshire Police and others, whether they've considered doing something similar, because even if this isn't mandated by government, it is a choice that can be made. And one of those draft goals, they are still in draft, is that we will continuously strive to live, play and work free from racism. I'm having to read it because I haven't learned it off by heart yet. And prejudice, with zero tolerance for inequalities, stigma and discrimination in any corner of our lives. And all of those organisations are going to be signing up to these goals. So I think this is a really key way that we can ask them to live those words. So I just want to say thank you again. And yeah, I think you're going to have a lot of work to do off the back of this. So we're glad to have you.
Thanks very much, Kate. Are there any points you wanted to raise in response to anything you've heard today? Anything you didn't say earlier on that you want to, or any more points from the team? I will. Yes. Okay. Thank you. And I should say that we're joined today by Terry Galloway, who's led the national campaign around this and has done fantastic work to raise awareness of the importance of treating care experience as a protected characteristic. So perhaps I will go first to the Voice and Influence team, see if they've got any other comments, but then Terry, if there's any brief remarks you wanted to make, and thanks for being here today. And I should say, don't feel you need to, but I just wanted to give you the opportunity to come back on anything you said today.
So I'd just like to say that as many of you as we can get involved with as possible, we'd like to, because we're all proud to be from Sheffield. We've got a pretty close-knit community of care experienced young people with the various groups that we run and the friendships we've made over the years. And we want to make it Sheffield as the best place we possibly can for all care experienced young people. So we'll happily work with as many of you as we possibly can. So please don't ever hesitate to reach out.
Thank you. Terry.
Yeah. Sorry, I got off. Look, thank you for letting me speak. I know it's not normal protocol, but I'm just so proud of you guys today. The topics that you picked, we're hearing it all across the whole of the United Kingdom. These are real issues. But what I really wanted to make the point today is what I'm hearing and seeing in this particular council. You are the 73rd council across the UK to pass this motion. That's 40% of the UK population in England. But the setup that you have with this voice and influencing group, and you've got your portfolio holders here, the key for this campaign is, yes, it's a campaign and it's not into legislation, but the absolute key is to demonstrate impact from this policy. And in each of these areas that these youngsters have just said, there is a real chance to do that if there's will, and I can see that will, and I'm happy to work with these young people on the specific policy areas, because there is specific things that you can do to actually have impact. So if you're open to that, I'm really up for that.
Thank you so much. Right, colleagues, the committee has got a number of recommendations before us today. To note the resolution that the full council passed on 1st of November 2023. And I should just say that, that's not very long ago, and I really appreciate the speed at which colleagues have worked at pace to make sure that this has come before us today. So to note the resolution that we passed in November regarding care experienced people, and the context to that resolution is set out in the report that you've all seen. Second, to endorse the principles that are set out in the resolution, and to confirm that this council will regard care experience as a protected characteristic, whilst noting that further work will be required on the implementation of those principles and changes. And we've talked about working with you to make sure that implementation is done thoroughly and well. And then to agree that further detail will be provided in a report that's coming to this committee next week around the equalities framework, which is called Equality is Everyone's Business. So, a number of recommendations before us. Our colleagues can... Joe?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. So I didn't speak earlier because I was actually a little bit emotional. I'm slightly concerned. I'm sorry, just to explain myself. I don't have experience of care myself, but the home I grew up in, there were many children there who were in care or in and out of care. Some of whom were effectively, two in particular, effectively a brother and a sister to me. So, and I kind of recognise the people before us. I won't name them, but I recognise some things in the people in front of me. I'm slightly concerned that we've had this presentation, we've had this discussion, and we have a team here to influence us in particular, as well as influence more generally, and that if it goes away into a system, there's going to be another report, etc., etc. How are we going to get that influence? How are we going to hear? Because without that experience ourselves as members, we're going to be groping in the dark unless we're hearing sufficiently from the team. So I just want to be sure that we're capturing what we can. We're getting the benefit from the influence that is going to be delivered. I don't know if that's something to add to the recommendation or something, but does that make sense? Sorry.
It does make sense. Thanks, Joe. So I think it's on all of us as leads on committees and committee chairs to make sure that when reports are coming through, that we are seeing that the recommendations that were passed today are being adhered to, that care experience is being considered in the quality impact assessment, and that we're seeing it reflected in all of our decision making. We've got the fantastic kind offer from the team to work with us on implementing this, and I very much take on board the point that Ray's just made, that you've then got links out to other organisations and people across the city. So I think it's not all, we're not putting this all on you here today to work with us. We recognise that you're part of organisations and can help us access other people. So I think we'd really welcome the chance to work with you as an opportunity to get more lived experience shaping our reports. I think, Joe, this is where after this meeting today, we take the decision, we then have a follow-up conversation about more of the specific details of the implementation, and that we work through it together, because this is a new thing for how we're going to be taking decisions, but you're absolutely right that the team's influence needs to kind of have a bearing on the decisions that we take. Thank you. Okay. Brief, Councillor Dale.
Sorry, I think in response to Councillor Otten, I don't doubt for 1 minute that this team are not going to hold our feet to the fire on this. Absolutely don't. They have got a scrutiny, they do scrutiny anyway of all of the work that's going on in the council that impacts on them. So I am quite happy to have my feet held to the fire, as should all of us. So I know we've got to get the processes in place, but they are the people that are going to make sure that we're supposed to be doing what we're doing and feeding it back into this committee.
Okay, thank you. Okay, colleagues, the recommendations that I noted before, are people happy to support them? Yeah, agreed. Okay. Well, look, that is a big decision to take, and we're really grateful, hugely grateful for you coming today and for the work that you do. And as Kate said, you know, we are all extremely proud to be part of and working with an organisation that has, you know, yourselves as our colleagues here, and we'll look forward to working with you. And I think that it would be only right and proper that we again just show our appreciation for the team for coming today. Thank you. We'll just pause for 1 minute. And item number 7 is the retirement of staff. And in the report, we have a number of colleagues who are retiring, and their many years of service to this council is set out. So as is customary, I'd like to thank everybody for their years of service and dedication to this council, and we wish everyone a very long and happy retirement and a very happy Christmas as well. Is everyone happy to add their thanks to the colleagues who are retiring? Thank you all.
Thank you, Chair. Just there's some familiar faces there on this list, and we wish them all well. I'm not going to single anyone out, but 1 or 2 officers I've known for a long time.
There are, yes, indeed. Thank you, Councillor Mohammed. Okay, item number 8 is the work programme. Craig, I'll hand over to you. We've got a meeting coming up next week, an extraordinary meeting because we had so much on the work programme. Craig, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the work programme is on page 31 in your pack. It's only just over 3 weeks since we last looked at this, so there's actually not that many changes this time. You'll see that there's been a split on the items between this meeting's agenda and next week, and then a number of items have moved into the new year. There is just one addition I would mention that I was made aware of yesterday to add to the January meeting, and that's an item on major event hosting opportunity 2026 and 2029. Plus, I understand that there was a council motion last week as well, so I'm awaiting exact details of that, and I will pick that up in the next work programme, Chair.
Thank you very much, Craig. Any questions on the work programme people have spotted, want to ask about? Councillor Smith, you look like you're about to come in. Yep.
Yeah, I'll just pick up with Craig afterwards. There's one item you mentioned there would normally come through the committee I chair, but I haven't heard anything about that, so I'd like to pick that up with you afterwards.
I'll pick that up with you, yeah.
Councillor Brett.
Just a quick, potentially similar point. So on the work programme for the 24th, it says there will be a workshop for lead members of EDS, planning and highways and TRC about the heritage strategy. I think it would be helpful to get a date in for that quite soon. And also on the 21st, on the Graves Gallery, it says proposed workshop extended to deputy chairs of CPL and EDS. I presume the time frame might be a bit too soon for that one.
Thank you. I think on the workshop, yes, we're going to struggle to get that in before next week. And we'll note the other point. Thank you. Right, okay. Everyone content with the work programme then? There's a few points to follow up on. All right, thank you, everybody. So, item 10 is a significant item which is the draft council plan, which you'll have heard me refer to earlier on. Draft council plan called Together We Get Things Done. A report that sets out our objectives as a council, our ambitions for this council, for the city over the next 4 years, and it's aligned to our medium-term financial settlement. This is something that, as Councillor Mohammed referenced earlier on, we've got the LGA peer review team coming in this week to follow up on the review that they did of the organisation last year, and the council plan was highlighted by the team then. So it's really good that we're in a place where we can now talk about the draft council plan. I will hand over to Kate.
The whole of the senior leadership team are really, really excited and happy today to be able to present the draft council plan to Strategy and Resources Committee. As the leaders said, this represents a really important milestone for this organisation, and one that a moment that we have needed for a while, and that we're now at that point. It sets out for staff, our partners, and most importantly the people of Sheffield, who we are as a council, what we stand for, and the outcomes that we are committed to achieving over the next 4 years. As the leaders mentioned, the development of the council plan responds to a very specific recommendation in the LGA peer review last year, which identified the pressing need for a medium-term whole organisation plan, one with a very clear framework for our high-level policy direction for the whole organisation, which is then delivered through the key strategies, service plans, and the many contributions, the huge contributions that our staff make to the city every day. The priorities and outcomes set out in this plan are aligned with our medium-term financial strategy, which covers the same period, and therefore will ensure that our approaches to budget setting and strategic prioritisation will be intrinsically linked in future. So what does the plan say? The plan that's before you today firmly places people at the heart of everything we do, working with, listening to, and ensuring that all of our services are focused on communities and citizens. And it's a commitment to doing this together with our communities and partners as a whole and as a united whole council, reflecting the title, because together we get things done. The plan sets out that by 2028 we're determined to be one of the best performing councils in the country. Led by the plan, we want to build an organisation that this amazing city deserves, that reflects and respects the communities in it, and that involves and engages people in everything we do, delivering outcomes for the city. The plan sets out 3 policy drivers, 3 overarching drivers, which will be central to everything we do as an organisation. We could see them as a sort of triple lock. The first is people. Listening, involving and working with the people of our great city. Through the plan, we'll celebrate and stand up for the diversity of Sheffield, maximising the assets and strengths of communities, connecting more people into the city's success and creating opportunities for everyone. We want everyone in Sheffield to achieve their potential with fulfilling and healthy lives. And I think the session that we just had with key strategies and annual directorate plans, that through your committees, to remember the committees that members of Strategy and Resources chair, you'll be overseeing, driving and scrutinising. It's a plan about what we're going to do, but it's also a plan about what we stand for and what sort of organisation we need to be for the future. So it is deliberately ambitious. We know we're going to need to change as a council. We can make a massive difference to our city and to the achievement of the new city goals that I mentioned earlier through this plan. But we need to be relentless at getting quality and consistency of experience right for citizens when they interact with us. So the plan places great service delivery as a foundation to our bold ambitions. We feel we've made great strides over the last year in becoming the organisation the people of Sheffield want and need us to be, but the plan sets out what more we need to do in the coming 4 years, particularly the need to renew our relationship with communities, with equality, diversity and inclusion central to everything we do, improving equity and experience across all our services. And at next week's Strategy and Resources Committee, we'll look in more detail at our new equality framework and council as one team, so that everyone in the council feels they're working together and our whole is greater than the sum of our parts. We've heard the challenges we are facing across the local government sector in terms of, and the public sector more broadly in terms of funding. We need to be working collectively and efficiently and effectively across teams as one team to make sure we're delivering brilliant services and making sure that we're giving the space to our brilliant, passionate and skilled employees and colleagues to get to do the best work they can. Empowering them with the skills and tools they need to flourish and really recognising and celebrating success. So we hope this is a plan that provides outcomes we can all stand behind, a shared purpose for our whole organisation and the touchstone for our future plans and strategies, so every single member of the team here in Sheffield can thrive and contribute to our successes. And then finally, I just want to point out that as well as the plan, we've included an outline of the performance management framework that we'll bring forward alongside the council plan and the budget, which will come forward next year. The performance management framework is how we'll make sure that there is rigorous accountability for delivery around the plan, and making sure that all of there's a golden thread running through from the outcomes and the strategies that we agree as a council right through to the actions that all of our teams are taking. So the covering report asks for the agreement to a number of recommendations, but before we get to those, I'm very happy to answer questions, as is James. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you know, to say, I think this council plan is rightly ambitious because the people of Sheffield are rightly ambitious for their city, for their neighbourhoods, for themselves, for their families, and for public services in this city. And it's right that the plan reflects that level of ambition. I'd also just like to say thank you to the cross-party member working group that's worked with officers to shape and prepare this plan over the last few months in quite a short time scale. So, you know, the speed at which people have worked to pull this together is appreciated, certainly with staff as well. Any questions or comments on the plan? Councillor Mohammed and then Councillor Smith.
It's a comment, observation.
Yeah, let Martin.
Councillor Smith.
We're being ever so polite today, aren't we? Thank you for the report. I hope this doesn't sound too negative, but I disagree with some of the stuff you said there, Tom. There's nothing in here I disagree with, but it's almost by definition very aspirational in terms of objectives. You know, there's that terminology of a SMART objective. I can only spot 3 in there in terms of what are we going to do, when we're going to do it, when are we going to do it by, how are we going to do it. So I was hoping for more specificity in there, and I'm just wondering when we might be able to see that, please. And as I said at the beginning, I hope that doesn't sound too negative.
Well, let me just pick that up directly. I think the performance management framework that sits beneath this gives you the granular detail that you're perhaps looking for. So I don't know whether you've had a chance to take a look, but that I think will help to answer that. It's deliberately high level and rightly aspirational, and we can have that further conversation afterwards. But I think it's important that we do have high standards for this organisation and that we get ourselves into the territory, whereas the Chief Exec said we are in that kind of best-in-class category where we should be and want to be. And so I think it's deliberately aspirational. There's a lot to do in the next 4 years, but that performance framework and that sits underneath it, I think will make sure that we've got mechanisms by which we can hold ourselves to account and monitor our progress on meeting the strategic outcomes of the plan.
At the risk of entering into a dialogue, I guess I was reading it thinking of what if one of my constituents, somebody in the ward, came up to me and said, well, what's this mean to me then? And I get it, but it's that level of relevance to people. I would have liked to have seen a wee bit more in there, but that's just a personal opinion.
Of course, thank you. I think Chief Exec wants to come in and then Councillor Mohammed, I'll come to you.
Yeah, I don't take it's negative at all. I think it's a really, really good point, and it's something we are absolutely working on. I suppose the point I'd make is that we're a dynamic organisation with lots of different bits of the organisation in different spaces. So, for example, I know in adult health and social care, just because Angela caught my eye, there are a huge number of very detailed plans with very specific SMART objectives sitting alongside them, linking to many of the outcomes here in this council plan. In the area that the committee you chair covers, as you know, we've got very ambitious plans over the next 6 months to bring forward a number of second and third tier strategies that will support this plan, whether that's thinking about growth and prosperity, whether that's looking at skills, whether that's looking at heritage, events, etc. So I think the way to think about this council plan is as that ambitious overarching umbrella that sets out what are the outcomes that all of those different strategies that we rightly have in a large complex organisation, what are they all pointing to, and how do we make sure that they are pointing in the same direction, and that we're creating the conditions for our teams to work collaboratively across boundaries. So we're not creating silos around the organisation. So that's a really key point. And as the leader said, the performance management framework will set out baskets of measurable indicators under each of these outcomes that we'll be bringing forward over the course of the next few months, so that we're ready at the start of the new municipal year with the budget, with the MTFS clear for the next 4 years to launch this with a set of measures and metrics under it. And those will all be transparent, public, and reported on regularly. So I guess the answer to the question from your constituent would be, you know, here's the goal, here's what we're trying to get to, here's the goal, here's something that, you know, is aspirational and speaks to the vision we want to have. But if you want to get into the detail, here are the 3 things we're measuring, here's what the budget is for that, here are the teams working together on it. So hopefully that gives you a bit of confidence, but it's our advice has been that what we've missed, I think, as a council is that overarching combining vision that says wherever you are, whether you work in bereavement services or in major events or in adult social care, you can see how you fit into the whole and into that team and into that ambition for the city.
Thank you. So I've got Councillor Mohammed, then Councillor Naz, then Councillor Williams.
Yeah, so mine was more of a comment on in relation to 9.2 or the main report of the plan itself. So clearly this is a draft plan and we are now going to go out and seek people's views, and I very much, through you, Chair, ask the people of Sheffield to actually have a look at this. I know we're in the festive period, so by all means have a look at this either before Christmas or after Christmas, because there is time for you to feed into this, and you know, for me, Chair, it's now time for us to step back and listen to the views of the people of Sheffield so they can actually be part of shaping it. So politicians have had their go at this, now it's the chance of the people of Sheffield, and you know, as I said through you, Chair, I strongly suggest to them that they do help us shape this vision for the next 4 years, because we shouldn't really have had the LGA coming and telling us we should have had this plan in, but whatever the reasons were, that's water under the bridge. Let's look forward and have a plan that we can be ambitious and bold about. And yes, it's going to be challenging to be one of the best councils in the country, but you know, I think sometimes, yeah, one has to be ambitious.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mohammed. Councillor Naz.
Thank you, Chair. A city with a big future and a plan on how to get there, that's how I see this document. I welcome this. I'm actually quite excited about it. I think it's wonderful. But for me also, when I read documents like this, the how and you know, where and by when is really important to me. I have read the performance governance, and it's good to see there is a plan on looking at how we get there, because that's the most important bit, isn't it? You know, we can say lots of good things, but if we don't really have a plan on how we're going to achieve them, then there's no point really. There are going to be performance clinics. That sounds really exciting. Could we also get updates on how we're getting on with this once it's implemented, so that we can see the thread that is going through this document, how that looks like in real life and in all those strands? Thank you.
I'll bring in Councillor Williams and then come back. Yeah, Councillor Hurst after.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, great document, very ambitious, so thank you for that. One thing I think, as it evolves, as I'm sure it will, we should be thinking about Sheffield's role in the wider British society. I think Core City should be much more ambitious in trying to challenge government in terms of influencing government. I think that is one of our key roles, and I think there's nothing in this document really that covers that. There's a little bit about planet, but I don't think that's what you had in mind when you wrote the bit about planet. So as it goes on, if you could possibly bear that in mind as we move forward. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more, Councillor Williams. I think Sheffield needs to act and think like a core city and realise that as the 4th largest city in England, we have significant influence, and it's time that we used it in a way that we perhaps haven't been, haven't been for the recent past. But I think now, by setting out our stall, being ambitious, recognising our significant influencing power, then we can begin to do so. Councillor Hurst.
Thank you. Yes, I really like to ask about the plans that you have. It's quite a tight timescale to consider this plan at the budget in March 2024 full council. So in the intervening 3 months, how are you going to consult and take the views of the citizens on board, and if there are things to accommodate, do that?
Thank you.
Thanks for all the questions. So just in terms of speaking to Councillor Naz's points around performance management, I think the performance clinics are a really exciting innovation, and they're an innovation that's come from our team. So it's some parts of the organisation already operate in this model. It's a really, it's a data-led but supportive model of ensuring that performance isn't seen as something that is punitive, but is something where if teams have got challenges, they're able to bring those challenges forward openly and seek support, advice, ideas from others. And I think one of the things that we're really keen on, and is I hope it comes out in the performance management framework paper, is moving to that performance culture, one where we're always learning, recognising the challenges and the uncertainties we face, rather than seeing performance management as a really sort of punitive approach, which we know from lots and lots of evidence, nationally and internationally, only leads to people, frankly, not speaking up if they're struggling. So that's a really important initiative, and I think making sure we're very clear that through the performance management framework we'll be publishing lots more data more regularly and making space through individual committees. And I think particularly Councillor Naz through Finance Subcommittee, there's a really important role for overseeing the whole of that data, linking in a balanced scorecard methodology how we're spending our money with the results we're seeing. So I would expect lots more dashboards at your committee, so hopefully, I'm glad you're excited about that. And then I'll just pick up the Core Cities point and then hand over to James to answer Councillor Hurst's point. Again, as the leader said, I couldn't agree more, Councillor Williams. I think Sheffield in the last year to 18 months has played a much more active role in Core Cities, very proudly so. We were really proud to be the city chosen to launch Core Cities' recent report on the future of urban Britain, working with the Royal Society of Arts and other key partners. And I think the opportunity to make the case for the role of cities in our future as a country, and whether that's responding to the climate emergency, whether that's driving growth and productivity, whether that's making sure we're demonstrating what it looks like to be at the leading edge of community and citizen involvement. These are all places that we can, as we go on this journey as a council, be working with colleagues in other cities, but also telling the story of Sheffield and making sure we're lobbying really effectively through Core Cities. So while it's not pulled out in there, that may well be something that we think, as we iterate the plan over the next, in the final months of consultation, that we want to bring out a bit more strongly. So thank you for that. James.
Thank you, Councillor Hurst, for your question. In terms of consultation and making sure that we take on board the views that the people of Sheffield will express to us during that consultation, we've got that planned out, so it will run as part of the budget consultation. So we're pulling together the budget and the council plan consultation into one piece, so that we're not going out multiple times asking for the people of Sheffield's views, bringing that together. We've got a plan in place to complete that consultation, to bring the feedback that we receive from that together, and to analyse that in time for the Strategy and Resources Committee meeting in February, ahead of full council in March. One point I would make is that we have, in the formulation and development of the plan, also been very mindful of the fact that people have told us a lot about what they expect from the City Council over the last 12-18 months. We've had the City Goals process, we've had other forms of consultation and engagement with the people of Sheffield, including through local area committees. So we've taken on board some of that in terms of formulating this. So this consultation will add to that, rather than be a starting point in terms of understanding what the people of Sheffield think. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both very much. So we have a number of recommendations ahead of us. that we consider and endorse the draft council plan, that we agree to enable citizens to give their views on the outcomes, as James has said, alongside the budget conversation, to agree that a revised final draft of this plan comes back to this committee in February, to agree the draft corporate performance management framework, and to request that officers prepare a new outcomes framework to support monitoring performance against the plan, for that to come back to this committee in the new year, and also to agree to receive annual reports providing an overview of performance against the proposed outcome framework once it's agreed. Are members happy to support those recommendations today? Thank you very much. I think that's a really important decision and a milestone for this council, and so we can look forward to it coming back here in 2024. Thank you, everybody. Right, we'll move then through to the cost of living strategy update, and we'll be joined in a moment by Keith Leyland. Thank you very much for joining us today. So, this report is to provide an update on the cross-city cost of living response, including the winter plan. It sets out an update on plans to spend a previously ring-fenced amount of money from the Household Support Fund to make sure that we're doing all we can to put cash in people's pockets. And whilst we're taking steps to support people with the Household Support Fund, members will no doubt have noticed that on page 111 it says that the government has decided to close the Household Support Fund, which means that as yet it will not continue beyond March 2024. No doubt that will get picked up, but I'll hand over to colleagues to introduce and summarise the report.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll hand over to Keith in a minute just to take you through the detail of the report, but I just wanted to provide a little context for members to add to what Councillor Hunt has just said. So we began our work on cost of living in the summer of 2022 as the scale of energy price rises and other inflationary pressures became clear, and the impact that was having for people and communities in the city. And this committee put in place an overarching strategy at that point, working with partners to respond to the cost of living crisis on a whole city basis. And that approach has provided significant practical and financial support to people and families who have been struggling right across the city, and included repurposing the previous COVID hub to become a cost of living support hub, which Keith is responsible for. And I think it has been a case study in how the council can respond flexibly and agilely to emerging issues, and I know that Keith and team have looked to continuously improve the work of that hub, and particularly in response to the changing nature of the crisis, and to make their processes more streamlined and easier for people to access. So this paper, as Councillor Hunt has explained, sets out our winter plan for the 2023-24 winter period, and recognises that things have changed since the last update in July. It responds to the two recent resolutions of full council, firstly around putting money in people's pockets and supporting the city's Citizens Advice Service alongside locally targeted response to the cost of living crisis through the local area committees. It also, as Councillor Hunt has said, provides the committee with an update on two important government changes. Firstly, the migration of people who are on so-called legacy benefits to universal credit, which will be happening in the city. We've been informed by DWP in February 2024. And secondly, it brings to the committee's attention the likely ending of the Household Support Fund from this spring. That is a recent announcement, as I'm sure members will be aware. The team are doing further work on that, as you would expect at the moment, and we will bring back a further report about the implications of that and what that means for the city's cost of living response in due course, but we wanted to bring that to members' attention today. So I'll pause there and hand over to Keith. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, James. So yeah, I'll start with the winter plan. So I think as we've talked about, we've had a sort of sustained effort, citywide response, number of partners involved from businesses, the voluntary sector, and a number of internal teams within the council. Particular focus of the winter plan is thinking about those challenges associated with colder weather and the increased costs that the households face as a result of that. So it's very much an iterative plan and a live document that we've been working on really since the autumn. I think building and sustaining on our welcome places and using the shared prosperity funding, link workers in that to enhance that offer. We've gone out with some new communications now, a new simplified leaflet, which we've worked on with the voluntary sector partners. We've worked with businesses to define a clear ask from the voluntary sector, and that's going to be a campaign around food bank donations, which is currently gone live, and looking at interventions around our own internal systems to try and support people better before they actually get to a crisis point. So some of those things, as Jane touched on before, are things that are within our gift. For example, when we're noticing that people are struggling with things like council tax, that actually we're a little bit proactive and we contact those households and offer some support. And we've been doing a lot more closer working with schools and children's services in general across the city, seeing that connection across, you know, families that are in hardship and the impact that could have on children in the city. So we've been doing a number of events with schools and piloting different approaches, and one of the examples is in the interplan that we're doing at Fairvale School. So in terms of the Household Support Fund, the spending plan in July set out a delegated amount for the Director of Communities, and in that paper we set out the need to be flexible. It's an evolving crisis and we need to understand, you know, what we might need to do as the crisis evolves. That actual amount that was in that report did contain an error in it, and this report just corrects that error and provides an accurate amount of what the actual delegated amount was, and you can find details of that in Appendix A. In terms of the approach to the full council motion, so I'll take the first motion that was in July was an ask to allocate or to find unallocated resources to give 200k in additional to the Citizens Advice, 400k to our local area committees for responding to the cost of living crisis. So whilst no allocated funds had been identified, there was an existing 400,000 that had been allocated to the local area committees, and each local area committee has considered how they're going to spend that allocation and a portion of their funding to the Citizens Advice, and that's resulted in a grant of over £169,000 to the Citizens Advice, and that's will provide some extra capacity on their free phone telephone advice. The second motion in October, which was specifically around putting more money in people's pockets in Christmas, as Christmas comes up, and looking at how we could extend direct towards. We've done some work on that to try and identify groups that are potentially missing out on things like free school meals. Got a number of families on low incomes, but we don't actually hold data on those groups, and that's held by the DWP, and it's not shared with us. And what we've also seen is an exponential increase in demand on our application scheme. So receiving in November 112 applications a day. That's more than triple what it was when the scheme first came in a few years ago. So with that in mind, the Director of Communities is mindful to allocate that ring-fenced amount into the application scheme. We've done a lot of work on that scheme, particularly after the July decision, where we can sort of fast-track that process. We've got some processes in that automate things where we can match, where we can see that people are on low income, means-tested benefits. We can essentially, make a payment on that same day, which is you know, putting money in people's pockets as they're coming through to us. We see that as the most equitable way to disperse what is left of the money, and also to give regard to the fact that January and February have been the busiest times for that scheme historically. So as James mentioned about the future of the Household Support Fund, we are making the planning assumption that is going to end, and we're carrying out some work in the new year to focus on that. I'd also just like to draw members' attention to the access that's available on the community support helpline over the holiday shutdown. So we've seen in COVID, you know, when council services shut down, but also quite a lot of the voluntary sector services shut down. There is a kind of, often, you know, not too many people, thankfully, but there can be some acute need that kind of where people do need assistance. And we're going to have a service offer on the 27th, 28th and 29th of December with normal service opening times. And then back to you, Dave, to conclude.
Thank you. I think that probably covers everything that we wanted to say, so happy to take any questions.
That's great. Thank you both very much indeed. I've got 5 members who've indicated they want to speak 6. Can I just see if there's anyone else who... So I've got Councillor Dale, Parek, Williams, Johnson, Smith and Naz in that order. So I will take 2 rounds of 3. So first 3, Councillor Dale, Councillor Parek, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. It's not really a question. What I would like to do is support the recommendations in this report. I think the support is vital, particularly to families at this time of year through the winter period. I work with families who are struggling. But what I do need to say is I do find it shameful that this government have made the decision to close the Household Support Fund with no apparent replacement offer. The fund is important to helping families that we represent and work with, particularly those with children on free school meals. And coming from my portfolio, we support lots of children in this city with free school meal vouchers in the school holidays to a tune of £125 per child per calendar year. That's covering Christmas, summer, Easter and the half-term holidays with those free school meal vouchers. Now, the fear of this fund ending in 3 months' time will be alarming for families. You know, it will leave families struggling and it will leave children hungry in the school holidays. I work in communities, and like we all represent different people, I work with parents who already don't eat a hot meal during the day so that they can feed their children. The fact that this fund is going to be removed is unbelievable. And, you know, I think that this government's decision is ideological, I think it's shameful, and I think it's alarming. Particularly, we refer to this as a crisis, and that's exactly what this is. This is a cost of living crisis. And the fact that there's been no forethought in what this will mean for people in our community, I find abhorrent. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Dale. Councillor Pratt.
Thank you, Chair. Also, a comment. This paper is really welcome to see. It makes clear that over the last year, the Council's worked tirelessly to address the cost of living crisis, including using £4.6 million to pay for food vouchers in the school holidays for families where children receive free school meals. It's really welcome to see plans to put cash in people's pockets over Christmas to provide support for those who need it the most, and that an extra £660,000 will be available to support our communities. But we know that for far too many in the city, mortgages are rising, food prices are still going up, and energy costs continue to bite. There hasn't been a respite from the cost of living crisis. It's staggering that the government is planning to end the Household Support Fund in just a few months' time. We know that far too many people are even worse off than when the fund was itself introduced. It's been a lifeline to support people harmed by both the cost of living crisis and 13 consecutive years of economic failure we've all been subjected to. This report shows the extent of work taking place across the council, supporting welcome places, liaising with the voluntary sector, working with local businesses, and putting money directly into people's pockets. That's exactly what we should be doing, and it's what's clear is the government needs to step up, save the Household Support Fund, and take wider steps needed to address the actual causes of the cost of living crisis.
Thank you, Councillor Pratt. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I apologise, I've only got a question. This is obviously the second year of the cost of living crisis. What learnings have you taken from the first year and changed this time?
I think some of the learnings, in particular, mentioned some of them in this report, is that there's been a number of targeted payments that we've made, and while I think they are effective, they do get through to people as a proactive. What we do see is actually that some of that funding, normally a small percentage of it, is returned, and then we're then using that to disperse that to other households that need it. And I think there's certainly some learning done around actually how do we get money to the houses that need it, and I think particularly drawing more on our data and our understanding of what's happening in certain communities and working with community groups to then encourage people to come forward to access it. I think, you know, understanding that when we do communications and we get a message out, might do that once. We can't just stop at that. We have to keep on doing that. So just building on a continuous process of trying to learn really and adapt throughout it.
Thank you. That's very reassuring.
Councillor Johnson, then Councillor Smith, and Councillor Naz.
Thanks, yeah. Well, I didn't have a big political speech either, I'm afraid, so sorry to disappoint that. But having said that, I mean, I think the important point here is the Household Support Fund has made a massive difference to people in the city. It must be working so well, and we know that because the government's decided to cut it. So I was going to ask what plans there are for looking at what the outcome of that. But I know you did touch on that, and it might be that you can't say any more. If there is any more, I'd be very interested to know what. Because this is quite a sizable sum of money that's been invested in the city over the last. In terms of the specifics, what I did want to ask is what's the overlap with this, certainly when you're looking at the winter plan, with homelessness prevention targets. I mean, I mentioned before that homeless services, you know, service under immense pressures. There's a lot of people facing homelessness, and I just want to see how much overlap there is with the services in your team with those in Housing Solutions to see we're getting the maximum benefit there. And then third point is just about funding advice services. It's not a new thing that I said that the most effective way that this council can tackle poverty and inequality is to fund advice services who deal with individual people and, you know, save them from crisis there. But just like on page 110, paragraph 1.7 is the one that refers to the funding of via LACs of citizens' advice. And I mean, the point that strikes me here is that doesn't this just show there's a real need for core funding of advice services so that we can have some sort of guarantee of at least that basic level of service and system. And it just seems that LACs is, in this case, is a really, really inefficient way of splitting up the funding, then trying to recombine it after many iterations of decision making just to get back to the starting point. Is there a need for, so the point is there a need for re-establishing that core funding for advice services and or looking at developing our in-house advice provision as a way of looking for the longer term to have a sustained attack on inequality in the city? I don't know if you can answer those, but do what you can.
I'll take Councillor Smith and Councillor Naz and then come back to you both, if that's okay. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. It was a very specific question on section 1.18 around the transition to universal credit, and a point you raised there. You want to reach out to people to help them with this, but we don't know how many people that are impacted by this in Sheffield because we haven't got the data. And there was somewhere else in your presentation you mentioned something else and said, oh, we don't have the data from DWP. So that's two examples of that. Is it that we're not allowed to get the data from them? Or can they not help us in any way to help people? Pardon my ignorance, but that's what they're there for, isn't it?
Councillor Naz, thank you.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. I've been speaking to local residents who have shared that it's still very difficult for them to speak to Citizens Advice Bureau. How will we ensure that the Citizens Advice funding will help alleviate the pressures on local people? Could we get a quarterly update and breakdown on performance in regards to this? Also, in terms of face-to-face meetings in local communities where people can't access services, you know, via digital services, is there any plans for CAB to do more face-to-face? And I asked this last time and I was told that there would be more face-to-face advisors working out from communities. That's not actually happened yet. And my second question is, what engagement is being delivered in communities to capture the issues seldom heard families are facing on the cost of living? You talked about a communication plan, having a simplified, updated leaflet. Is that also being offered in community languages? Yeah, that's my questions for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Naz. James and Keith.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. I'll start with Councillor Johnson's questions. I think the first one was around plans around the Household Support Fund. I think, as I said earlier, we are actively planning for that now. I can't say too much more about that at the moment, but I think it's fair to say that we, in bringing forward proposals, one of the things that we're very mindful of is avoiding a very abrupt ending to provision, and what we can do to try and make a bit of a softer landing if that's where we end up getting to. I'm aware as well that there are various initiatives around sort of lobbying government around the ending of this as well, and no doubt that will be something that we will wish to add our voices to. I will ask Keith to pick up the point about your question around the overlap with homelessness prevention work. But just on the funding of advice services, clearly that's something that is considered as part of the Council's grant aid process in terms of our overall funding to voluntary sector organisations. There is a piece of work underway at the moment around looking at the Council's relationship with the voluntary and community sector, and this is one of the issues that's being picked up through that. Keith, do you want to say something about the homelessness prevention point?
Yeah, I will. We've got a specific working group with colleagues in housing solutions, and some of our work through our data dashboard has really shone the light on a lot of the pressures that are in the private rented sector, particularly around security of tenure, but also poor quality housing conditions. And I think there's a real sort of desire within the council to start to shift our focus to be more upstream and looking at those, looking at addressing the root causes, poverty as a root cause that leads to things like homelessness. So it's very much a work in flight, but I think what we're wanting to do is work with those teams and actually start to come up with some specific interventions that we want to pilot in certain areas, and then take the learning from that and look to try and scale those up if they're working.
Do you want to pick up the DWP point?
Yeah, the DWP point about data sharing. There is, it does come down to the fact that information is held by the DWP and they don't share it with us. It's something that it's always a kind of pressure point. We do get some data. We actually get a data set that relates to the people that are in receipt of free school meals, but we don't get the data set that shows the other group that's in another set of incomes. And we have asked, but we've just been advised it's not shared with us. And the other point that links to data about the migration, I do think we will actually get some better data around what the households are in Sheffield, because we are working with the DWP on it at the moment. But the announcement's only just been given, and they have got it identified as South Yorkshire only. So I think it's a working flight, but I do think we would be able to get a better set of numbers in the coming months. Sorry, yes, so February. Sorry, in the coming weeks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dale, just very quick, I think you've got a follow-up point, but brief, if that's all right.
It's just a comment, Chair. I mean, I did say at the beginning of when I spoke that I do support the recommendations in this report, but I make no apology for coming into this chamber to express my concerns and outrage at this government, especially when it impacts the children of this city. And if that makes that political, then I'm doing my job. Thank you.
Here. Councillor Mohammed.
Yeah, I just want to come back on, James, in terms of the advice centre stuff. You know, myself and Councillor Fox, before the elections this year, did meet with the Chair and the Chief Exec to make the point that I think Councillor Naz was making about the fact that we accept that because of COVID, the advice moved all to on the phones, but as Councillor Fox pointed out, and I did, and others have, that there are communities that are missing out on that advice because of the lack of face-to-face. And my understanding was that the advice were going to go away to look at it because it came on the back of, I think it was a substantial amount, maybe £800,000 worth of funding. And our challenge back to CAB was that we'd like to see more advice. So maybe we should take it away from here, James, to say, where have you gone with that? We had that meeting probably February, March. Yeah. You know.
Thank you. I think Councillor Hayes, you want to come in on this point too, and then we'll draw this to a close.
Yes, I agree with Councillor Mohammed. There are lots of people in my community, in my ward, that are missing out on advice simply because they can't get access, they can't get through on the phone lines, and they don't feel able to express themselves well enough on the phone, and they're not articulate enough. They're not confident to come out and say, right, okay, I need help with A, B, C and D. They need face-to-face help before they can trust you sufficiently to be able to ask for your help. And I would, furthermore than that, I would make a plea for, we're investing in the welcome places, and those are places within the communities that are trusted. And my first port of call would always be to sit down with people there. It's somewhere that they feel safe, it's somewhere that they trust, and if we can ideally look at reinstating face-to-face in those places, that would give a lot of reassurance and help to those most in need. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just come back on the kind of face-to-face advice point. So it's my understanding through through that funding for the CAB, by increasing the telephone advice line, that is done with the intention of being able to create capacity for more face-to-face work. There's also the South LAC, which is piloting a specific face-to-face offer. It's doing that with the community support helpline that it's chosen to do. I think in terms of the cost of living sort of engagement events that Councillor Naz mentioned, we've done over 100 events in the communities, and we're continuing to do those. You know, it's sort of on request really. Communities that come forward, we often do them in partnership with other different organisations as well, and we're working quite closely with Multiply around adult learning and having events together with other organisations. I'd also the point about the communications and now they're translated. So some of the work that we did around using QR codes is meant that we use WhatsApp groups to disseminate some of the messages that are easily then to be translated by people in communities, because you can use it just through your phone and different phone settings. That was something that we started doing in COVID, and it's had a lot of good feedback, and we've continued to do that. And then at our own access points, you know, that the helpline, that we do have translation services as part of that offer.
Just one final point. Thank you, Keith. I'm sure that we can get a written update from members on the point around face-to-face advice, if that would be helpful.
Thank you. I think that would be helpful. Okay. More hands have immediately shot up. Conscious, can we make it very, very brief? Because I do want to move us through to, we've got a couple of more agenda items. We've got Councillor Otton, Councillor Williams, in that order.
Thank you. It's not on that. A very quick question to you, Tom. I much appreciated Councillor Preck's speech earlier and Councillor Dale's comments as well on the government's policy. Does this mean that the Labour Party is committed to restoring the Household Support Fund?
We'll remind you that the Conservative Party are in government right now, and I think it's incumbent on us to put all of our collective pressure upon the government to make sure that they see the error of their ways. There is time. I hope that they listen to not just the concern that's being raised here, but right across the country about the Household Support Fund. I think at this stage we need to be putting pressure on them, but I can certainly, of course, feed your concerns through to the National Labour Party, because we'd be glad to have your input to those policy conversations. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, meanwhile, back in Sheffield,
yeah,
my understanding is quite clear that face-to-face is happening now. It's been increased. Is it meeting demand? Probably not. Will it ever meet demand? Probably not. But I know it has been increased and it is happening now.
Thanks, Councillor Williams. Well, I think we've heard colleagues talk about the importance of face-to-face, and if you can reflect back the strength of feeling here today in those conversations with citizens' advice, and then share that written response back with us. That would be really helpful. Well, look, I think none of us should feel at all embarrassed or ashamed about making political points in this chamber. We're here to advocate for our communities and the people that we represent. And frankly, the decision that the government has taken around Household Support Fund is a shameful one. And what I would just say is that we often talk about the cost of living crisis as if it's this natural phenomenon that's just happened. The cost of living's gone up. Well, the cost of living crisis is a jobs crisis, a wages crisis, a benefits crisis, and it's a result of decisions that have been made. Energy bills are high because a choice has been made not to introduce a full windfall tax in order to help lower bills. People's incomes are lower because the government chose to cut the £20 uplift to universal credit that was brought in during the pandemic, and then they took it away again. A choice has been made to deny people proper rights to clear work schedules so that people don't know what income they're going to get from one week to the next. A choice has been made to cut the Household Support Fund so that last year the council got £10 million to be able to help people on low incomes in the city. This year we're projected to get £0. We're making a choice today by saying that the ring-fenced amount of money, £660,000, should be allocated to help people in this city, to put money in people's pockets. And I think it's a choice that we can all stand behind and say we're doing what we can as this council to help people over the coming few months. So that's what the recommendations are saying. There's 3 recommendations which hopefully everyone has had a chance to take a look at. Are people happy to support those recommendations? Thank you all very much. Thank you, James. Thank you, Keith. Okay, the next agenda item, item 12, is the committee climate statements. And thank you very much for waiting patiently. We're being joined by Mark Whitworth and Laura Ellendale. Fantastic. Thank you both very much. Perhaps before we get into the report with the introduction and summary, you could just introduce yourselves to the committee.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Mark Whitworth. I'm Service Manager for Sustainability and Climate Change.
Laura Ellendale, Sustainability Programme Officer in Mark's team.
Thank you very much for joining us today. So the committee climate statements is the item of business that we're here to discuss, and I'll hand over to you to introduce and briefly summarise the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to give a very short introduction and then I'm going to hand over to Laura, who's going to talk us through the report. Earlier this week, we presented the annual climate report to the Transport, Regeneration and Climate Committee for consideration and agreement, and we're really pleased and excited to be here today to present our statement of climate commitments, which are a product of all our committees, and as such are your commitments, and clearly demonstrate how our committees are taking a collaborative, cross-party approach to address the climate emergency and the actions that will be taken to address the collective impact of our work. I think these statements are a really clear example of what Kate and James described earlier in the item on the draft council plan, of how together we will get things done, and set out a series of examples and work that we'll be taking across all the committees in terms of our work towards leading the transition to a net zero economy. So I'm going to hand over to Laura, who's going to talk us through the report in a little bit more detail. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. So the committee climate statements is a composite of statements that we were aiming to respond to the annual climate progress report that was taken to the Transport, Regeneration and Climate Committee on Monday, the 11th of December. And also, as Mark says, restate that cross-party council commitment to taking what action we can to address the climate emergency, to adapt our city and council to a changing climate, and to reduce emissions in order to achieve our ambition to be a net zero city by, and council by 2030. But what we also wanted to do was take the opportunity to increase understanding of the impacts that climate change will have on our committees, and the opportunity that tackling climate change offers, and the contribution to climate and net zero action that each of our policy committees are currently making and also can and need to make moving forward. So it's always been acknowledged that achieving net zero by 2030 was going to be extremely challenging. The report has highlighted the true scale of that challenge in the public domain. It's a position that, you know, the position Sheffield finds itself in is not unusual amongst local authorities at the moment. We do face a period of uncertainty around the policy levers that will be available to us in the coming years to support us to deliver our action at the pace and scale that is needed. But within that, maintaining an ambitious target amidst that uncertainty is really important. In particular, when we're having investment discussions and to enable a really robust policy framework to be developed. So while the Sheffield City Council constitution does state that all committees must take climate and biodiversity into consideration in the decision making, exactly what is needed and by whom is not always very black and white. Commonly, when people think about climate action, they think about decarbonisation and physical interventions, so your electric vehicles, your heat pumps, wall insulation. But actually, the impacts of climate change can't necessarily be mitigated against by those physical things. They require this wider transformation at all levels of society, and that means that everybody has that role to play. Within the statements, the reason that we've tried to draw this out is because it's not always, individual committees don't necessarily have a lot of decarbonisation action. So adult health and social care, for example, is more around how we're adapting and meeting the needs of our vulnerable groups who are much more likely to be impacted the most by the impacts of climate change, and actually are usually less responsible for emissions. And also to prepare us for the fact that the number of people who fall into those categories is likely to further increase unless we take significant action now. So what we're asking you to do is to consider the statements that we've got there. And I do just want to take the opportunity to thank everybody, so both members and officers who came together to bring this item to committee, because as Mark says, it really was a team effort across the council. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. 4 members have indicated so far. I've got Councillor Miskell, Councillor Agencio, Councillor Ofton, Councillor Perec. Can I see if, and Councillor Hurst. Okay. I'll take those 5 then. Councillor Miskell.
Chair, it's clear that people in the city want to see action to tackle the climate emergency, and this year we've led the charge to decarbonise our city and bring citizens, the public sector and partners and the private sector along with us. But whilst we're committed to deliver the changes that are needed to tackle the climate emergency, would officers agree with me that we need central government to take the policy and fiscal decisions needed to allow ambitious cities like ours to accelerate our response? From talking to colleagues in town halls across the country, each and every one of them highlights how we're all forced to compete for the scraps of short-term funding that come and then invariably go depending on the whims of ministers. Now, I think that we're doing great things with those scraps of funding, but the fact that we get no core funding for climate action is a scandal, and it holds our city back. Despite the lack of action from government nationally, I'm pleased that we're pushing ahead here in Sheffield. Two things that I'd like to draw people's attention to. Over the past few weeks, I was welcomed to Sheffield College and its Olive Grove site to see the new facilities that we've supported them to install, upskilling the workforce to retrofit homes by installing heat pumps and solar PV. And it struck me during that visit how schemes like this demonstrate how the next generation are part of the solution to the climate challenge that we face. But that more funding is, of course, needed from government to ramp up this sort of training. On that theme of opening up possibilities for growth in this city to combat the climate emergency, I'm really pleased to see that we're bringing about real change and following examples of cities like Heidelberg in Sweden to introduce heat zones to unlock opportunities for our city to decarbonise. That'll see us working at speed to connect up the existing district heating system with an expanded network that turns waste heat from businesses into low carbon, cost effective heat to communities across the city. Heating that will really help free our transition from gas and provide us with the energy security that people in the city need in a really uncertain world. It is, in my view, creative approaches like this that will help us speed up our net zero transition and shows the sort of level of ambition that we in this city in Sheffield all collectively have.
Thank you, Councillor Miskell. Councillor Genzio.
Hi, thank you very much for the report. I have a couple of bones to pick with it. Notwithstanding that this is hugely important to me, as you can imagine, being from the Green Group, and the fact that since of a committee, I've made climate change as one of the priority and being supported hugely by the officers in adult health and social care, and we've made it a priority for the committee well before we were requested to produce a statement at very short notice for this report. I am bringing a message from my committee that statement from our committee was a draft. We have not agreed as a whole committee, and I think none of the committees have actually voted on that being their statement. So although I support wholeheartedly why we're doing this, because climate change is so important and we all have to prioritize it as a committees, and we have to have it really high up on our agenda, I disagree that this is the right way to do it, with SNR having statements that have not been kind of thoroughly drafted and agreed on a cross-party basis. And I would like to suggest that we ask each committee to actually look at their statement as part of a committee meeting, vote on them. It's going to be a very quick item for them, and then come back here. It's especially because the recommendation, to be honest, it's just to consider. So what's the point of considering if they are still drafts for the committees? I just don't understand. You know, literally, we were sent a statement on the 28th of November for consideration and comments, and then it's just gone off without us actually discussing it properly. And we've done a lot of work on it, so our statement is not going to change. It's probably, this is our statement, but just in terms of form, we don't feel that we've had the opportunity as a committee to consider in full and really think about it and vote on it as a full committee, not just people who can attend that particular briefing on that particular day. So I really appreciate the effort and I understand the urgency of it, but I feel that this is not in the spirit of the committee system. This is not a cabinet. This is a representation that is cross-party, and I have kind of the support of cross-party from my committee on me raising this today, and you can watch the recording from this morning from my committee.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Agencia. I think it is worth saying that we are asked to consider the reports, the statements rather. The statements will always and should be a work in progress, because they're never a fixed point in time when we say we are now done, this is our plan. We should always be moving forward and seeking to do more. I think it's right that this group, as a cross-party, cross-council committee, does take a chance to look in. There is work to be done, and I do take your comments seriously, but we are today considering them. The responsibility for them sits with the committees, not here. Councillor Otten is next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much. I've got three questions and interspersed with some comments on the report. Before I get to that, we seem to be in speechifying mode today a little bit, don't we? Another excellent speech from Councillor Miskell this time. Brazen defiance of the Labour Party's decision to cancel £28 billion of climate spending in their policy. I'm slightly concerned now, unless Tom can confirm that is going to be recommitted, that spending, that Councillor Miskell, along with Councillors Perec and Dale, will be deselected by the Campaign Improvement Board for defying the party line.
Jerry, this is turning into a speech.
Yeah, that was a preamble in response to what's been said. So my questions, thank you for the report. I think the interim report gave some valuable context in terms of the nature of the challenge and the nature of the ask of the individual committees, that the levers for the big changes are not necessarily lying within individual committees. And it was interesting when you said we all do our bit, we all have to do our bit, because X, Y, Z, therefore we'll have to do our bit. I think that's also that's both true and unhelpful in some respects, because it's not clear to everybody what exactly it is our place to do. Certainly, waste and street scene, I'm quite happy that we have a big statement in waste and street scene, because we have important jobs to do. Look, if people stop generating waste, then the waste service can go to zero by 2030. That's fine. I think it's unlikely to happen. If we turn the street lights down, well, we can save a few percent. But I had at my committee last time some people from Walkley come to us and say, can we turn the street lights up a bit, please, in Walkley, because it feels unsafe and it's dark in a number of places in that ward. So I'm sure you'd be interested in that, Tom. So, these are not easy decisions to make. These are things we have to strike the right balance on. But I would agree on committees that are dealing with delivering services to people, should they be spending their time thinking about climate policy? Or if it is just use of vehicles, use of buildings, maybe they should be corporate policies, how we use up, what sort of vehicles we have, what sort of buildings, what we do with our buildings. And then we can let the adults focus on the adult health and social care and so on. That might be a better approach. I'm just throwing that out there. But my first question, I suppose, is, we decided to go for this in 2019. It's now 2023, nearly 24. We're 4 years into a 11-year, we've got 6 years left. How far have we got? What is the carbon emissions of Sheffield? Off the top of my head, I'd guess it was something like 3 million tonnes a year. If we've got 6 years, are we going to reduce it by 500,000 tonnes every year? So we've got 500,000 tonnes. Is that our target for next year? Where is that coming from within here or from elsewhere? I appreciate it's not all going to be from within this, the measures in this document. Or am I being too literal? Am I being too literal in reading the words net zero and thinking we're talking about getting to a position of net zero, and it actually means something else? It means, we're going to have lots of good intentions and lots of narratives and, do lots of things that are the right sort of thing to do, but are actually going to only save us a few percent here or there. Am I being too literal? And also, I suppose my third question is, where is the net part of net zero? Because I'm seeing there's lots of ideas and measures in here that will save a few percent of carbon emissions in all sorts of ways, which are really good. But that's not getting to zero. There's got to be, if there is something to be netted off against, if there is some carbon sequestration going on, where is that? Because I'm not seeing any of that. And so without that, there's no way to get to net zero without getting to gross zero. And I think we recognise gross zero is not going to be possible. So, and I appreciate, we ought to be planting more trees, and we are planting more trees in some ways. But if we're talking about 100,000 tonnes a year or something to be achieved, to be netted off, then how many trees is that? Because I imagine that is a lot, many times more trees than we have any intention to plant. So those are my questions. I would appreciate answers. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Questions possibly smuggled into a speech there. I will go to Councillor Parekh, then Councillor Hurst, then Councillor Smith, and then I'll come back and we can have reflections from the team. Councillor Parekh.
Thanks, Chair. I think partly actually as a reply to Councillor Rushton, I think your point about where is the net in net zero is an interesting one, because there's been a lot of talk today about not bringing the politics into this, but I remember Councillor Hunt earlier in the week or last week wrote a letter to the government about moorland burning. There is an area where there is huge potential for carbon sequestration. We know peat bogs are some of the best stores of carbon if they're not being burnt to facilitate grouse shooting. I think Councillor Johnson respond to that saying we should only focus on actions Sheffield City Council can take. We can't only focus on actions Sheffield City Council can take because we can't tackle the climate crisis ourselves. We can't reach net zero ourselves. I think a case in point of that in the report, I think it could be spelled out a bit more. Under the Economic Development and Skills portfolio, we know that small businesses are responsible for 50% of all business emissions. This is out of our direct scope of influence. This is where we need the government to step in and help us as a city to reach net zero. We've done a lot. There's a lot in the report about plans to give grants to businesses to support them to become greener, helping expand the district heating network and getting local business on it. We can't do this alone. I think there is more than is needed to be reflected in there about our convening power, about using supply chains and procurement to help decarbonise, but some of this is national. Again, about care providers, it talks about decarbonising their fleets. I understand the message we're getting back from private care providers is they can't afford to make building improvements that would help us reach our net zero goals, because we don't have an overarching strategy from government. We don't have that just transition approach to transition all aspects of our economy. I think there's more I would see reflected in the EDS part of this, of using convening power, trying to identify whatever leverage possible we have to green our economy. But I think it is really important we can't lose sight of the national and international approach to this, because clearly we can't reach net zero alone.
Thanks, Councillor Parekh. We're coming up to 4:30, which is the formal limit for the meeting, so members have to extend in order to continue the business. Great, thank you. Councillor Hurst, then Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this, Mark. I know from my previous service on the Track Committee how seriously we investigated routes to address the climate crisis in Sheffield. But I feel that this report is perhaps still very much at the beginning and is the wrong way round. It's weighted in the wrong way. The delivery for individual targets towards our ultimate goal rest with the individual committees. And I would like to know what the individual committees' take on these commitments are, on the key actions, and hopefully the next time we see this report here, it's got a report that's been considered at committees where there are adopted key actions and they're setting out progress towards them. We don't have to wait for the route maps to be developed to start taking action. And it's only in committees that we can discuss that and embed that and actually report real changes. So for the next time, thank you, but can we turn it on its head and have the actions agreed at committees and report back on the steps to achieving those goals when it comes here? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hurst. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. At the risk of jumping to the defence of officers, I heard what Aunt Angela said about the reports not going through committees. I'm quite happy with what it says there for EDS in terms of, I think what you guys have been doing is marking our homework. So we've got our objectives, we've got the 10-point plan, and this is a case of, so what have you done about it? And all of the items you've listed there have gone through our committee, they've been agreed. We've also got agenda items going forward to look at that. So I'm quite happy with that. And I must disagree in a friendly manner with what Councillor Perec said about the council not being able to impact or influence on SMEs. I mean, we've got the low carbon business support programme, so 1.3 million there is small grants for training and hard actions that small businesses can take, all targeted at SMEs. And we've also got the just over £2 million specifically targeted at cultural and social enterprises. So, in the grand scheme of things, will it solve the problem? No, but the council through the EDS committee is hopefully making a positive impact within that sector.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. I'll hand back to Mark and Laura. I think it is worth saying, though, that committees will be the formal bodies that will make decisions. We are being asked to consider these statements. This is not at all changing any decision making or suggesting that this committee is making decisions here today. We're just being asked to consider this so that we, across the piece, get a whole cross-council view of what is going on. Councillor Agenzio, and then I'll hand back.
Sorry, I just want to clarify, mine wasn't a criticism of officers, because I understand exactly where officers are coming from, and being on a committee that takes this very seriously and has done, from when I've been, whenever it was that I've been involved, I know that can be done, and we just need to ensure that it's done across committees. The statements are not on my committee work plan, so if we have to take it seriously as committees and we have to get the results in the various committees, we have to put it on the work plan, because we have to agree as a committee that we are committed to carbon zero, net zero, and doing whatever it is that we can in each individual committee. Some committees can do very much, as Lauren has said, in other health and social care. There isn't really much, but the impact of climate crisis on the people we look after is huge, and potentially it's a risk for the council. So we have to look at that, and it is very important. So it's not criticism of officers. In fact, thank you for bringing it up, because then we can have this discussion and bring it back to the committee, and then maybe look at it. Also, could the General Counsel just explain to me what consider mean, what difference does it make in terms of a decision making or not making in this forum?
I don't think it has any particular meaning other than the meaning that this committee wants to give to it. I think it's there for that. I think what others have already said, that the reason it's here is for that overarching view for this committee, which is there under the Constitution, to have that overarching look, a strategic overarching look over not only the work of the council but the work of each committee, to have that consideration here today, so that it's informed and that the individual committee chairs can take that back when these are considered by their committees.
Thank you, David. So yeah, we'll considering. But
it was a lawyer's answer.
It was a lawyer's answer, but it was a good one. I think the point is that Angela's made is right, which is that it's on us to put it on our work programmes. Essentially, by considering this, and people can ascribe whatever meaning they want to that today. We are saying that we see these committee statements, these climate statements. I think we've heard today that planet is one of the three drivers that will shape the decision making in this council as we go forward. And to take that seriously, I would suggest that it would be right that this makes its way onto work programmes, so that those statements are then considered in the appropriate way. I do want to come back to Mark and Laura, see if you've got any comments, but just two very final brief points. Councillor Perrett, Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Chair. And just an equally polite reply to Martin. I did mention the low carbon grants in my contribution, but I think the point that you'll agree with is they won't help transition all businesses in Sheffield to net zero alone. We need more resource.
Councillor Johnson.
Right, so slightly around the houses conversation there about what we're doing with these. I think we're saying that we want the committees to go away and check with all these things on the work programme. So what I was going to suggest is we actually write that into our decision. So as an extra recommendation to ask each committee to ensure that the items in the climate statement are included in the work programme. So
if members are happy to support that, that's fine. But I think a principle that we've always been clear about this committee is that we don't, instruct other committees to do things. Our job is to be a convening committee. But I think I think people can hear the recommendation, and if colleagues who are committee chairs want to make it go on to the work programme, then that's entirely in the gift of committees. But if the feeling is that you want to write that in as a recommendation, then so be it.
Thanks, Tom. Just on Councillor Johnson's proposal, I'll repeat the point I made earlier. I think where we're talking about vehicles and buildings, it would make sense for there to be a single corporate policy, and possibly with the exception of housing and not in housing, a corporate policy, rather than having the Adult Health and Social Care and the Children and Families Committee think about vehicles and buildings a great deal. It would make sense to think that we think about vehicles and buildings here, or possibly at Finance Committee. I'm aware that the Finance Committee, for example, makes decisions and made a decision last year on fleet acquisitions. And it went for diesel vehicles. This was last year when I was on the committee. And I said, well, okay, on the life of these vehicles, we could still replace them in 2030 and still meet net zero. But if they make a decision like that this year, then we'll be emitting carbon in 2031. So, yeah, so, I mean, I think taking both points on board, we shouldn't be telling other committees what to do, but we should be telling ourselves what to do. And therefore, my recommendation with the vehicles and buildings elements of this, we put on our work programme.
yeah, I just want to know whether people are actually going to act on these, or whether it's just been a hot air exercise. Frankly, if we come at these things, they're saying all the committees could do these things because the people have put them forward as proposals, but we're not actually going to resolve to do them either here or at any other committee, and we can, it does sound a bit as though we can go away, pat ourselves on the back and say, yeah, we've talked about some climate change stuff, it'd be nice if it happened. But I'm just saying, either we should decide that we're going to do this in this committee, or we should pass it back to the other committee and say, identify these things, can you make sure that you put them on the work programme? It doesn't mean you have to deliver them word for word, but I just want to really call people out on whether they actually believe in this stuff that people in this room have put forward, or whether they just want to make it look as though they're doing something.
Tom, yeah, thank you. I think that was the point of my comment to Mark, not to criticise the officers in the way that they prepared us for action, but the fact that if the committees are the ones that take the action, then we should be receiving reports. We've achieved this, and only then can we consider positive outcomes. So I think if we're considering this as a call for action, it would be a request to the chairs, a request to officers to make sure that these items, these action points, these key actions for each of the committees appears in the new items on the agenda for within the next cycle, so that the committees can get on with doing what they're doing and contribute towards our aims.
Okay, so we've got a proposal that there's a recommendation that's added to say that the actions in the statements are put on, that committees put them on their work programmes. Joe, I think your point is a different one, and I take it on board entirely. We've just agreed a draft council plan with one of the strategic outcomes being around, city on the move, growing, connected, sustainable. This is trying to break us away from siloed working, where committees do one thing, and each of us has 9 different plans. But I do think there is something about each committee demonstrating leadership in their particular area with its statement as they have done. And I think this proposal is well made to put it on the work programme. But equally, I think in so doing, we need to be really, really clear that it is not the responsibility of any one committee to follow these through. It's all of our responsibilities, which is why it's come to this committee to have this kind of discussion to make sure that there's a cross-cutting council response. So I think if there's a conversation, if there's things that you think we should be on our work programme, then let's pick that up perhaps afterwards. But there's a recommendation being made so that actions from the statements are added onto the work programme. And the first recommendation is that we consider the climate reports. Are people happy to support that? Both.
So we are adding
Yes.
recommendation to our
Okay. Are there any final remarks you wanted to make? Sorry, we've been talking around you for the last 20 minutes. So.
Yeah, so it was just to sort of clarify in relation to the key actions that are on those statements. Those are ones that officers and members within committees have identified as either being on the current committee work plan or within current service plans, so things that are likely to be coming to individual committees over the coming months and possibly up to a year. So I just wanted to clarify that for you, that this is why we wanted to show what action is also taking place. I absolutely agree in terms of where we've got the different committees. This should help to show where the focus should be, that absolutely, if we have a more people-focused committee, that's where that strength and that action comes and how that supports the other activity, because it's not just about physical interventions. You did also ask about, where we're up to in the annual climate progress report. So we achieved, since 2017, which is the baseline year, city emissions have reduced by 12.3%. It is in the overarching statement, you'll see those figures. And council emissions have reduced since the baseline year of 2019 by 3%. In relation to the net part of net zero, yes, carbon sequestration and how we use our land is absolutely something that we need to be looking at and will be necessary in order to achieve our net zero 2030 target. And that will be looked at through the development of a way we use our land route map that is going to be started to be developed early next year. So just wanted to answer those questions for you. And the report went to TRC on Monday, so it's also available online if you would like a copy. In relation to the influence around supply chains, again, this comes back to this going to the individual committees to really work these through, make them really robust and actually have that full committee commitment individually for each policy committee, because actually, you know, we have a broad understanding of climate and the action that's needed. But in terms of that real detail, you know, you guys are the people who know the remit of your committees, you know your officers know what they're talking about, and that's why it then needs to be drilled down to that next level. This just gives us, as Councillor Hunt said, a starting point that goes, right guys, this is what your emissions are in relation to your committee. These are the kind of impacts you're going to see that will relate to the remit of your committee. And these are the kind of decisions that then support climate action, again, within the context of the remit of your individual committees. But we would absolutely support this going on to other committees and support helping those discussions if support's needed. And then finally, there was just to say that if we need to see this as an ongoing process, as you say, these are iterative. This is kind of the first step to set out that initial draft. They are absolutely going to need to go back to committees and to work through how that gets translated into tangible action. But we do really appreciate taking the time, and like I say, we agree that more work is needed on these, and then I'll pass to Mark to respond to a couple of the other points. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. So, yeah, I'll very briefly try and pick up some of the other questions, and apologies if we miss anything off. But I think starting off with Councillor Miskell's question around central government support, I think Sheffield, along with many other cities and towns in the country, find ourselves in a difficult place in terms of ambitious targets, but obviously at the moment, as we've recognising in the report, at the moment there are certain issues around policy, around national policy, that are preventing some of that moving forward, and also in terms of the funding environment. So we recognise that the resources that are required in order to help us achieve net zero are not currently there, and I think that what we need to do is continue those conversations that we're having at the moment through organisations like Core Cities, where we're working together to put together a collective voice around some of the things that we need, both in terms of the funding and also recognising that this isn't just a voice from local government, it's also from other organisations, institutions, from industry as well, manufacturing industry, obviously with the delay in terms of the ban on internal combustion engine vehicles, and you had companies saying, well, actually we need to continue working towards our own ambitions on that and setting their own dates in terms of bringing forward investment on that. So I think we all recognise that there is definitely a need for that, and without some of that funding, we are going to very much struggle to be able to deliver the targets that the ambitious targets that we've set. And I think that's all part of the approach that we're advocating here, is actually how, along with the work that we can be doing and trying to bring others in the city together, working with other partners, it's also about putting a really clear message back to government around some of the things that we need to be doing, and then at the same time demonstrating some of the opportunities that we have in the city. So looking, as you mentioned, around things like the heat networks, where we do have programmes that are running with government support, but also the opportunity for bringing in private sector investment as well. So I think that the current position is, yes, we definitely need to be having that sort of investment and policy, clear policy position to give people that stability and long-term direction. I think probably the question from Councillor Argentio has probably been discussed, so I'll jump over that one unless you want to go back to that. But I think probably some of the points that I raised just in that last response may cover some of the points from Councillor Otten's perspective around what we are doing to trying to work towards 2030. Laura's talked about some of those other activities that we're looking to promote, and actually, to be fair, are already being undertaken at the moment by organisations like the Wildlife Trust, who are working hard to look at programmes around peat bog restoration, and with other partners as well, like Moors for the Future, recognising the importance of carbon sequestration through some of those natural routes as well as other partners in the city looking at alternatives around carbon capture and storage. Although I think what we've recognised previously is that we need to be working very much on actually decarbonisation through reducing and looking at switching from carbon forms of energy to looking at ways of reducing that, rather than necessarily relying on technologies that currently don't exist, which I think is an important position, but recognising that there may be things around the corner, but we can't bank on those, so we need to be doing everything that we can. I think there is a point around, just coming to the point around having those single corporate policies. I think, as Laura's already spoken about, I think there is clearly something about how there needs to be that corporate approach, but I think also from services like adult social care or housing or other colleagues that are working, for example, with vulnerable client groups, is actually considering how climate and the changes that we're anticipating in the city are going to affect those people, and actually how they need to design their services to adapt to that. And that isn't necessarily something that we can do through a policy of electric vehicle or looking at, for example, how we insulate our corporate estate. Clearly those things are going to move and move the dial towards decarbonisation, but there are other things around that adaptation agenda that we need to be thinking about, around how those are going to impact on those vulnerable people within the city. And then I think the point that the Councillor Hurst was making around the work around committees, and I think there is something around, as we've already discussed, about taking these back to each of those committees and making sure that these are then built into each of those committee work programmes, and then having that approach where there is something then around how the committees are then reporting. And I think that then fits in with some of the other work that's going on, both with the Climate Oversight Board that's been established within the organisation, bringing that senior leadership approach, and also then fitting in with what we said earlier about the proposed new council plan and the ambitions that are set within that. And again, sort of looking at how services can contribute towards those three priorities, which include planet. And then I think, coming towards the end of my scribbles, I think probably the last few points, I think Councillor Parekh point about what can be done, and obviously we've addressed the question around the need to work both with national government, and again the international position is clearly really important, and we need to be working with that sort of in mind, but also looking, as I said earlier, about how we can secure some of that external funding, and obviously there are things that we can be doing. There are things that we are doing, as Councillor Smith said, with industry, with business, with commerce, looking at some of the grants for the low carbon business support. But then there are other opportunities that we need to be exploring as well, around some of the other opportunities to decarbonise, help support industry and business to decarbonise, where we may not necessarily be the main player in that, but we can help facilitate some of those conversations, working with other partners like the universities and the mayoral combined authority. And I think, well, I hope at least, I can't see any more names or scribbles, but that I've covered most of the points that were raised.
Thanks very much indeed for your time today, for your answers, and for bringing this report. I think it's been a really useful discussion, and there's a clear action that now comes from it that people will take this away, make sure that work programmes reflect the actions that are set out in the statement. So thank you very much indeed. Okay. Final agenda item for today, item 13, which is the Q2 budget monitoring report and the 24-25 SNR budget update. I will just remind people that the appendix that I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting is closed, and so if anyone wants to refer to anything in it, we would just need to pause the webcast. And Roland, thanks very much for staying with us today, but you would unfortunately be kicked out right at the end. So if anyone wants to do that, then please just think of poor Roland. He's sitting for 3 hours. So you might want to. Okay, you've been given notice. Philip.
Great, thank you, Chair. I'll try and keep the introduction brief. So this report really comes in two sections. So the first is the Q2 budget monitoring update, which covers the whole council. So the overall position improved by £200,000 from 17.6 million overspend in Q1 to 17.4 million overspend in Q2. So that's the position at the end of September. That overspend hasn't changed in terms of the drivers since Q1. So it's children and adult social care placements. Again, that's costs rather than the volume of placements, home to school transport, temporary accommodation pressures, which are a result of the full cost not being covered through benefits under the DWP. We will cover those overspends with the budget risk reserve, but in doing so, that results in the reserve reducing to £13 million available then for future years. Within that overspend, this committee is overspent by 600,000. A large proportion of that is driven by the shortfall in housing benefits, which is offset by underspends in the services within strategic support services. And again, section 1.7 on page 199 of the pack sets that out. The second purpose of this report then refers to the budget for next year and this committee's proportion of the budget and the budget setting process. There is a position that's detailed in the report and then in the appendix, which sets out the savings proposals and the mitigations that are proposed for this committee. That results in a position of £200,000 still to find, which we're working to address. I think it's important also to note that we haven't yet had the finance settlement from government. That will follow next week, we expect. That will set out the exact proportion of grants and allocations that we will get from government. Once we have that, we'll take a consolidated view, which again will give you a verbal update at the meeting next week, which will then feed into the final budget report that this committee will get in February before full council in March. So I will stop there and respond to any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I just get an indication of who would like to come in on this?
Chair, I will, but it'll have to be a closed session.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, so we'll pause there.
I think mine was public facing.
Okay.
I think, but once I've asked the question,
I think in the interest of, if there's any doubt about that, the safest thing to do would be to pause the webcast now.
No, I don't think it is.
Okay, I will go with your judgment.
As long as it's not on that appendices.
No. So thank you for your indulgence, Chair, and I hope I don't get it wrong. The thing that's missing for this meeting, so the Finance Committee review the overall position at every one of their meetings. I'm just wondering, is there an update from the Finance Committee on their view on this? I don't know if Councillor Naz wants to share a few words on that, but isn't that the process?
Isn't that this committee is looking at the whole next year's budget next week? The Finance Committee, I think, have got a meeting next week. Yeah, the Finance Committee have got a meeting next week. This is just us noting where we as a council are at the end of quarter two, and noting the savings that are being proposed for this committee's areas of responsibility. Okay. I've only got Joe. Can I see if anyone else wants to come in? So it's one question from Joe. Okay, we'll pause the webcast now. Thanks very much. We are, okay. So, we have a couple of recommendations for us to consider. That we note the updated information provided on the 23-24 revenue budget outturn, note the budget proposals presented to this committee, and note this committee's initial response for budget proposals set out in the report, including savings set out in Part B, and further information as requested will be provided on that. Are we happy with those? Okay, thank you very much, everybody. That has been a long meeting. See you all again next week.